Chapter 241 Asking God. In order to prevent the fragment from being lost again, due to various accidents, Sui Jing put the fragment back into his pocket. After Sui Jing placed the fragments, he looked down at the corpse on the ground for a while, then squatted down and untied the bandage on the imposter's face, raised his handsome eyebrows slightly, and said calmly, "This doesn't seem to be Shi Xiangqi's own corpse, right?" "Ah?" Li Qimei frowned. She didn't doubt the authenticity of Sui Jing's words, but she didn't see anything unusual about this Shi Xiangqi. "Xiang Yuan, what do you think?" Sui Jing did not immediately explain Li Qimei's doubts, but called Shi Xiangyuan to him. Shi Xiangyuan didn't expect that Sui Jing would suddenly call him, but he still walked over obediently and started to examine the fake body according to what Sui Jing said. "She is indeed not Shi Xiangqi." After a moment, Shi Xiangyuan said, "As you can see, there are obvious signs of sutures in the hairline and mandible of this corpse." Knowing that Li Qimei and the others might not understand the reason, she explained in detail to others. "And you can see that there are obvious traces of the joint on her wrist. As far as I know, Shi Xiangqi doesn't have so many strange scars on her body." Then Sui Jing, "Haven't you noticed anything wrong with this impostor before?" Li Qimei asked. Before this, Sui Jing had actually healed this impostor's injuries. Didn't even she see these clues? "No," Sui Jing said truthfully. "My guess is that these traces of it, which are similar to sewing, can be hidden while it is alive. It will probably only emerge after it completely loses its ability to respond to life. That's probably why it's so successful at pretending. Moreover, the counterfeiter has most likely met Shi Xiangqi. And what's more, they may have had a brief exchange." "Forget it." Sui Jing stopped delving into the details. After all, considering the current situation, studying these would not do them any good. "Move her position and prepare to find the remaining fragments," Sui Jing said. I'll come. He Lianhai responded. "There are only 2 men here, he and Li Dun." He was embarrassed to let several ladies do such chores, although none of them looked like they needed special care. But in order to prove that he was not a sluggish person and was still somewhat useful, he had to take the initiative to take on the task of cleaning up the mess. After all, with Sui Jing in other places, he couldn't help much. As for Li Dun, his legs were trembling with fear. Let's not talk about whether he wanted to help. Even if he really wanted to help, he was powerless. But how to clean up? He Lianhai asked innocently. People in the previous dungeons just died, and no one had ever dealt with them. Just drag it to the corner and lean on it. Sui Jing's original intention to clean it up was just to keep it out of the way. What about him? Goli Lai casually pointed at Shi Xiangtian, who was still collapsed on the ground. Sui Jing's original intention was not to care, but he was still a living person after all. It feels weird to have him here like this. What's more, in the final analysis, there is no deep hatred between them that can cost their lives. Thinking about it carefully, it seems that a little friction would not kill him. At least we can't let him die so casually. Sui Jing sighed silently, reached out and lifted Shi Xiangtian's collar and dragged him to the corner at the other end to lean against. He Lianhai clapped his hands after finishing dragging. So, what should we do now? How to find the 3rd fragment? Sui Jing walked around the hall with a dull gaze, and walked to the pair of incense candles in the center that were half a person tall and as thick as an average adult's forearm. I have an idea. Sui Jing bent down and looked at the pair of red incense candles. The strange thing is that the flames of this pair of incense candles are very high and bright, but after burning for so long, the wax oil on them shows no sign of melting. Other scented candles were gradually melting out wax oil, except this one. Sui Jing gently touched the red candle with his fingertips, and suddenly felt an astonishing chill hit his forehead the moment he touched the body of the candle. She retracted her hand silently. How about we put out the candles first and try it? Is this appropriate? Goli Lai didn't agree with her approach. Shi Xiangyu was killed just after the candle was blown out by the wind. Are they actually taking the initiative to extinguish the candles now? Sui Jing saw what she was thinking and nodded slightly. The results of doing something proactively and doing something passively are quite different. Goli Lai felt that Sui Jing had already said this because he was already somewhat confident. But there are quite a lot of candles in here. Do we have to blow them out one by one with our mouths? No need. Sui Jing pointed to the pair of huge red candles in front of him. Blowing it out should be okay. But one thing you have to remember is that after the fire goes out, try not to make any noise. Otherwise I can't predict what will happen. Huh? As soon as Sui Jing finished speaking, he blew away the candlelight with a gentle blow. Something magical happened. The moment the candles of the pair of huge incense candles were extinguished, the flames on the other incense candles also died out in a moment. In the silence and darkness, one could barely hear anyone's breathing. Sui Jing's eyes were fixed on the huge golden statue in the center of the back of the hall. She noticed from the first time the incense candle was extinguished that the black mist that gathered around Shi Xiangyu came from the statue. As long as there is black mist coming out of it this time, Sui Jing's guess will be correct. Everyone was waiting quietly on the spot, when suddenly a cool breeze blew in the hall again. Sure enough, Sui Jing clearly saw billowing black mist coming out of the sculpture again, just like before. This black mist is very substantial and thick, as if it can be pinched with your hands. No wonder Sui Jing could still vaguely see it in the dark environment. But unlike before, this time the black mist only lingered around the statue, and did not go straight to a specific target person like before. It seems that no one has triggered the death mechanism in the game yet, so it will not attack other players staying in the hall indiscriminately. Another possibility is that it failed to find the target in the room in a quiet situation where you could hear a pin drop. Of course, this possibility is very small. After Sui Jing finished checking, he lit the 2 incense candles in front of him again. The moment the firelight reflected in her eyes, the black mist that was floating around without a clue went back. The sudden cold wind also stopped as usual, and the empty hall suddenly became bright, as if nothing happened. Although no one else saw what happened in the darkness, they vaguely sensed that something was wrong in the darkness. Even so, they still didn't understand why Sui Jing walked towards the statue in the center behind with a calm pace. Knock knock knock. Sui Jing curled up her fingers and tapped tentatively on the lower part of the statue with her knuckles, but came to an unexpected conclusion. This statue is hollow, Sui Jing said. Not only that, although the statue is gleaming with golden carvings on the outside, if you look closely, you can find many large or small cracks on its body. Under the flickering warm orange candlelight, a strange feeling of discomfort unexpectedly appeared. He Lianhai also knocked on the body of the sculpture, confirming Sui Jing's conclusion. Is it the only one that is hollow? Or are all the statues in this hall hollow? Only this one. Sui Jing's eyes showed a vague light. Does this mean there must be something wrong with it? It's hard to say that what we're looking for has something to do with it. Ah? Li Qimei looked up in surprise at the statue that was almost as high as the roof. No. Real or fake? How do you know? Li Qimei asked 3 questions in succession, and continued without waiting for Sui Jing to open his mouth. Besides, it's just a statue, and it can't speak. If it's really related to it, how can we find it? Sui Jing gave them a brief summary of what happened just after the candles were extinguished. So this is how Shi Xiangyu died. TSK. Li Qimei sighed. So according to what you said, there must be something weird even if there is nothing we are looking for in it. She nodded suddenly as if she had understood something, her face full of high morale and eagerness to try. In that case, let's find out together. Chapter 242. Asking God. Sui Jing looked at her fighting expression, and a hazy smile appeared in the corner of his eyes. Suddenly she had an idea, and her right hand consciously touched the gold bracelet wrapped around her left wrist. Actually, I have a way to determine whether there is anything we are looking for here. What can I do? Li Qimei's curious eyes fell on Sui Jing's face. She was very interested in the method Sui Jing said. Here, use this. Sui Jing took off the bracelet and held it with his fingertips. When it comes to finding things, it's really good at finding things. As he spoke, he muttered to himself, I just don't know if these dead things can be put to any use. After all, it was used to find someone last time, and it was stained with blood. What is this? Li Qimei reached out and touched the bracelet. The workmanship was very fine, but at first glance, she knew it didn't look like an ordinary object that could be obtained casually. Where did you get it? Picked it from a long-tongued ghost, Sui Jing said bluntly, but didn't want to say more. But it was only used once. The implication is that it is useful, but not necessarily useful. Let's try it first. Sui Jing didn't hesitate, took out a fragment and stacked it with a gold wire and waited for the result. However, they waited for a long time and did not see the golden thread produce the slightest reaction they expected. Isn't it possible? Li Qimei noticed Sui Jing's expression and carefully asked. Is it because it has been used once, so it cannot be used? Or is it a one-time consumable? Although Sui Jing's facial muscles were not affected much, his eyes were staring at the threads and fragments in his palm. However, it was Li Qimei's subjective opinion that her gaze was intense. In fact, her gaze was not sharp, although she was staring straight at the 2 objects in her hands. It seemed more like she was filled with suspicion. Is it really going to be hard? Sui Jing thought to herself, and let out a light breath before going out. Just when she was about to put away the bracelet and the fragments, she saw the first end of the silk thread suddenly moved. I saw the silk thread spraying out one by one, gradually wrapping the entire fragment airtightly. Then they all emit a not-so-bright golden-green fluorescence similar to the photoelectricity of the tail of a firefly. Oh! It turns out it's in the device connection. After a moment, it loosened the tightly wrapped fragments, and its head began to beat like a snake's brain, gradually spreading towards the outside of the palm of the hand. Sui Jing's eyes followed the thread, and just as she expected, the golden thread ran towards the statue. Sui Jing originally thought that the silk thread would stop when it reached the surface of the statue. Unexpectedly, it penetrated directly and poked holes in the statue with its own diameter. What's even worse is that Sui Jing can't hold it back. No matter, Sui Jing's fingers were strangled to the point of pain. The threads were like wild horses running wild, and they still stubbornly dug into the statue. Okay. The rebellious period has arrived. Right? After all, Sui Jing was still a little worried about the strength of the black mist hidden in the statue. This golden thread is really so useful. Even she would feel a little pity if it was wasted in vain. The thread pulled by Sui Jing's fingers suddenly started to riot, and the thread swayed greatly in an extremely violent manner. Sui Jing quickly raised his eyes to look at the statue. Although it was such a big statue, it was actually shaking slightly at this moment. Not too drastic, but very noticeable. She twisted the silk thread with her fingers and felt a little surprised. Could it be that this silk thread was fighting with the black mist inside? But this situation seems to be a bit dangerous. Of course, now that the hall was brightly lit, Sui Jing was not the only one to notice this. Li Qimei took a step back with her legs in hand and watched the situation in front of her tremblingly. Sui Jing, will this statue fall down? If they fight too hard. Should. Yes. Before Sui Jing finished speaking, as if to answer Li Qimei's question in time, the surface of the statue suddenly cracked, and the cracks opened at an alarming speed. Quickly retreat, Sui Jing shouted sharply. If such a big statue falls down, if you don't avoid it in time, you will suffer some physical pain no matter how small it is. Seeing this, everyone hurriedly retreated behind the red-painted door. Just as they stood firm, they heard a loud bang. The statue collapsed in front of everyone, stirring up thousands of feet of dust. Cough, cough, cough. Everyone quickly covered their mouths and noses to prevent themselves from being choked by the dust in the sky. The dust raised by the collapse of the statue completely obscured everyone's sight, making them unable to close their eyes. Fortunately, it is hollow. Otherwise, if such a big statue fell down, the whole temple would probably be shaken 3 times. But it's amazing how much dust can be stirred up by just being hollow. After the dust in the sky almost completely dissipated, Sui Jing opened his eyes. She put down the hand covering her mouth and nose and looked straight at the place where the colossus collapsed. The statue that seemed to be shining brightly on the surface has now turned into a pile of rubble. However, it was originally an empty SHL with only its own shape, and in the final analysis, there was not much difference. The golden thread she held in her hand showed no sign of stopping the fight. But could there be black mist among the pile of rocks? Then a piece of broken black mist emerged from under the ruins and immediately answered her doubts. It is said to be dilapidated because there are actually several irregular holes in it, and I don't know how they were made. It was unclear whether the black mist could see the humans in the hall, but it was rushing straight towards them. Sui Jing was about to draw his sword and cut it in two. The moment the sword had not been taken out of its sheath, the golden thread quickly wrapped around the black mist. In an instant, the black mist split into pieces and dissipated into the hall. After the golden thread had solved the black mist, it rewrapped itself around Sui Jing's wrist to form a golden bracelet. However, the first end of the thread had not been completely wrapped around it yet. A small section was left to tap on the back of Sui Jing's hand. With, presumably, the black mist just now was the last one left. Jingxian, how about it? Am I great? Do you want to praise me? Sui Jing couldn't understand its little idea of asking for rewards. And even if he could understand it, he might not pay attention to it. So Sui Jing grabbed the small part and forced it back. Jingxian, I really don't understand the style at all. Sui Jing walked up to the pile of ruins. And just then, the golden thread flew towards it, which meant that the fragments must be inside. Sui Jing lowered his head to search, and sure enough he found a cyan fragment in the ruins. She picked up the pieces and retreated to a slightly more open area. The others saw that she had another piece of debris in her hand, and all came over. Sui Jing took out the other 2 pieces, and placed them on the ground. 3 green fragments can just fit together to form a complete rectangular jade plaque. It's just that there are 2 conspicuous cracks on the jade plaque. It's shining. It's shining. Goldie Light pointed at the jade plaque on the ground and exclaimed. As she said, the fragments indeed glowed dark green. The light gradually became brighter, piercing the eyes of everyone present. After a while, the light gradually dimmed again. When everyone looked at it again, they found that the cracks on the jade plaque had miraculously disappeared. Sui Jing picked up the jade plaque and looked at it carefully. The front of the jade plaque was engraved with complex and meticulously carved relief patterns. She didn't know much about the deeper things related to gods and Buddhas, so she didn't understand the meaning of these reliefs. The back of the jade plaque was smooth and clean, but Sui Jing's fingertips touched a few grooves, like dents with words engraved on it. She turned the jade metal over and found that the 3 characters greed, anger, and ignorance were clearly engraved on the back. Ah! Now she probably figured it out. Why does the system repeatedly mention desire at the beginning? This is the clue and the result. Probably the characteristics of the events they experienced in this game can correspond to the 3 poisons of Buddhism: greed, anger, and ignorance. Like the previous task she did with Li Qimei, a large part was due to the old woman's greed. But Shi Xiangqi was angry. Inside this statue is the remaining madness. Greed, anger, and ignorance are the worst of the 3 poisons in Buddhism. Greed makes people never satisfied. Anger makes people malicious. And ignorance makes people have wrong perceptions. Wrong perceptions can lead to greed, hatred, and ignorance. Over and over again. The cycle continues. When people's own desires are not satisfied, they will impose them on the gods and Buddhas. But what if gods and Buddhas cannot fulfill their wishes? What exactly does the hollow statue represent? Is there a way to resolve the 3 poisons that were found? Do you understand the answers to these questions? Congratulations to the remaining players for successfully clearing the dungeon. Now start counting points. After the points calculation is completed, all players are asked to leave the instance as soon as possible and go to the rest area. Just as the stereotypical mechanical sound disappeared, the red painted door that closed them opened with a bang. There are no walls and courtyards outside the door, and the abbot's figure has long since disappeared. There is only a bright and dazzling winding path with no end in sight. But everyone knows where it leads. Let's go. We should go back. Yeah. Everyone nodded in unison. Finally. I can finally go back. By the way, let's bring Shi Xiangyuan with us. If he was left here alone, there was no telling what accident would happen. What the Buddha said is not false. The calamity of a Samkhya is the 3 poisonous minds. The nonsense of a Samkhya has countless names. In these 3 poisonous minds, there are endless sands of evil thoughts, and each thought lasts for a calamity. Such endless sands are uncountable. So there are 3 great Asamkhyas. Greed, hatred, and ignorance are the 3 poisons in the world, from which all troubles and evil karma arise. Although the ignorant mind has 84,000 afflictions, passions, and evils like the sands of the Ganges, they are all caused by the 3 poisons. The 3 poisons are greed, anger, and ignorance. Chapter 243. The resting place was bombed. After stepping out of the threshold of the hall, Sui Jing and others walked toward the end along the passage that was made up of countless white rings, and was extremely bright like light pollution, even though they could not see the end. But no matter what, at least in this copy, they finally came to the end of the story. Even if you don't know whether it's true or false, you don't know the answer. Just like the scene at the end of every time before. A group of strangers who had just experienced life and death together walked on this radiant road and dispersed. Most likely they will never meet each other again. As for Shi Xiangyuan, I hope that the day we meet again, she can truly change her face and become the kind of person she longs for. If you want to be her Sui Jing's partner, you must have certain abilities. The time in the game is neither long nor short, but it is enough to change a person's appearance from the inside out. It exploded again. Why did it explode again? What's going on? Who did it? As soon as Sui Jing stepped into the resting area with one foot, she heard that the usually neat and orderly resting area was extremely noisy at the moment. The sharp sirens were mixed with a lot of noisy and disorderly conversations. She stayed there for a moment. I barely extracted the keywords amidst the noise. Rest place. Blow up. Help. The rest area exploded? No way. Is it so exciting? Judging from the direction they ran to, I didn't know where they were. After all, The layout of each resting place is different. Not to mention her incomplete memory. Let alone knowing. She walked against the flow of most people towards the player accommodation area where she was about to stay. She didn't know if it was a hotel or another apartment this time. But you can also take a look at the next copy arrangement. Based on past experience, it can be deduced that most of the rest area arrangements are projected on the outer wall of a tall building opposite the accommodation building. Sui Jing walked to the accommodation building and stood under the large virtual electronic screen. The information of the supervisors and players of the next game was clearly displayed on it. None of those players she had met before. But the inspector for the next game happened to be acquaintances. Inspector list, Yu Huan. Number 258. Meng Yutong. No. 477. And the last one. Ma Chushi. Number 111. Judging from the numbers, they should all be the group who became inspectors after her. But this is too much of a coincidence. Are 2 of the 3 supervisors her former team members? Is it deliberate or a coincidence? Although she doesn't expect to meet Chi-Yun every time, she still hopes to have someone she is familiar with. Or someone who knows her well. In the resting place, it doesn't matter when nothing happens. But if something happens, relatively speaking, it is much more convenient to know someone than not to know him. After reading the arrangements, Sui Jing walked towards the front desk of the hotel with his backpack on his back and handed his ID to the front desk staff for routine registration. Did something happen outside? Sui Jing asked casually while the staff was still operating the check-in process on the screen. The staff member shook his head, looking uninformed. I don't know either. This is not within my jurisdiction, she answered conscientiously, as if she didn't want to meddle in other people's business. Okay. Sui Jing took his ID and room card. Room 308. Sui Jing held a thin piece of room card between his fingers and prepared to take the elevator upstairs. After she has packed everything, let's go and see what happened in the rest area. Sui Jing inserted the room card into the card slot. After entering the door, she looked up and saw her previous suitcase placed at the end of the bed. There was also a square sticky note taped to the suitcase. Sui Jing lifted the note and held it in his hand. It read neatly on it. The suitcase has been returned to you. Don't be too touched. By Chi-Yun. A shy smiley face was drawn at the end. Sui Jing smiled slightly and put the note aside. She wasn't that surprised when she saw the suitcase. As the management of the game, Chi-Yun wanted to know which resting place a player would stay in the next game. It was not a simple matter. Sui Jing roughly tidied up the room and took a leisurely bath, washing himself all over. After staying in the dungeon for a few days, I finally had the opportunity to take care of myself. Even if she does not have a mysophobia. Who doesn't want to feel clean and fresh? After she packed up, she pulled out the key card and prepared to go outside to inquire about the situation. It would be better if she could meet Yu Huan by chance, which would be much more convenient for her. She doesn't have to ask anyone else. Do you want to go out? The staff at the front desk caught a glimpse of Sui Jing walking outside from the corner of his eye. He quickly put down his work and raised his head to stop her. Do you have anything important to do? Do you need me to find someone for help? New players staying in this hotel are uniformly reminded after check-in that it is best to stay in the hotel and not go out at will. Although her authority does not allow her to know what happened in the rest area. In her consistent understanding, no one should take the initiative to go out in such a messy situation outside. Unless there is something important and they have to go now. It can't be done. No need. Sui Jing said. Why? Can't we go out now? It's not that I can't go out. It's just, the staff hesitated. She had no right to force Sui Jing to stay in the hotel. But she was just worried about what would happen if she violated the rules. It's okay. Sui Jing noticed her concerns and said, I'll be back soon. And she really didn't believe that the system would really judge her as violating the rules if she just went out for a while. When Sui Jing walked to the door of the hotel, most of the restless crowd outside had calmed down. The resting area returned to its usual orderly appearance. Ah, I didn't even catch up with the show. It's so boring. Sui Jing looked far away and saw Yu Huan and his party of 3 people walking towards the hotel in the distance. As Huan gradually approached, he naturally noticed Sui Jing standing in front of the hotel. He first turned his face to the woman with a capable posture and an upright face, who followed him and moved his mouth. Judging from her dress, she should be Meng Yutong, another inspector of the copy of the fate. He seemed to have said something to Meng Yutong. Meng Yutong nodded solemnly, took a folder in his hand, and walked quickly in the other direction. Yu Huan glanced at Ma Jieshi again, looked at Ma Jieshi's face, and hesitated to speak, but finally brought him over without saying anything. He walked up to Sui Jing and said, "Boss, when did you arrive?" "I just arrived not long ago," Sui Jing replied. The weather in the resting place this time was pleasant. So Sui Jing didn't wear a coat and only wore a black slim-fitting shirt on his upper body. The serious look on her face was very similar to the way she used to look when she was still monitoring the game in the system. "Did something happen in the rest area?" Sui Jing asked. "When I came here just now, the flow of people outside was much greater than now." "Hey, it's not a big deal." Yu Huan didn't take it seriously. "It's just that the storage center over there was bombed." Yu Huan knew that Sui Jing didn't understand the situation. So he elaborated. "A player accidentally brought items that were prohibited from the dungeon back to the rest area. This is not a big deal. After all, it has happened before. But I didn't expect that the thing brought back this time would explode on its own. It exploded twice, which shocked people. If the front desk hadn't seen him sneaking around and asked a question when he entered the hotel would have been blown up. If he really blows up the hotel, it might also affect the personal safety of other players. So his crime will be huge. Will the person who brought the things back be punished?" Sui Jing asked. "Then I don't know." Yu Huan shrugged. "He has been taken for the first round of questioning. If he was brought in accidentally, it should be fine. But if he was brought in on purpose, I'm afraid he will suffer a little. The specific situation will have to wait for 477. The interrogation is over." Yu Huan was afraid that Sui Jing wouldn't know who 477 was. So he hurriedly added, "That's the lady who just walked with me." "I understand." Listening to Yu Huan's words, it would probably be a serious matter if he intentionally brought the items in the copy back to the resting place. However, she had never triggered a ban, so she didn't know what would be classified as being prohibited from taking out copies. Could her gold bracelet be one of those that can be taken out freely? Sui Jing thought, raised his eyes, and glanced at Ma Chushi, who was standing next to Yu Huan with a look full of resentment but a straight face, and twitched the corner of his mouth. He looked at her so strongly that it was difficult for her to ignore it. Then she turned her gaze to Ma Chushi and said softly, "Ma Chushi, do you have any objections to me?" Ma Chushi originally thought that Sui Jing had forgotten who he was. But now his eyes widened when he heard Sui Jing calling his name. In less than 10 seconds, my eyes turned red. "Ma Jishi, do you have any opinions?" He looked directly at Sui Jing in front of him. Even though she had been kicked out of the system once, even though she might have no memory of the past, but the tone of her questions now is still exactly the same as before. No different. Is his captain really back? Chapter 244 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Ma Chushi knew that he had always had an awkward mentality towards the current Sui Jing. Wanting to get close, but being afraid to get close. This awkward mentality mainly came from the rumors he heard about Sui Jing's unreasonable defection. He didn't know whether he should believe it or not. But he couldn't find any other reason not to believe it, because Sui Jing really never mentioned any relevant information to him. However, he had also heard something about Sui Jing from other places, and knew that her memory was incomplete now. She must have been forced to erase a large part of it by the system, and she could not remember many things. But he was different. He always remembered that Sui Jing would never call them inspectors by their code names, except for those inspectors whom Sui Jing didn't know or had never met before, and whose names she really didn't know. She would call them by their code names, although he didn't understand the reason at first. Since the system didn't say anything, it wasn't convenient for one of his subordinates to take care of so many things. What's more, the age difference between these inspectors is only about 5 years. So it is indeed not inappropriate to call each other by their first names. It's just that the system has systematic rules, and most inspectors will follow the rules and won't do this. In fact, it was so long ago that Sui Jing might not remember it even if he still has memories. He asked Sui Jing once why he didn't call other inspectors by their code names. At that time, Sui Jing just looked at him deeply and said calmly, "I just feel that if everyone calls them by their code names, their names will be forgotten by everyone over time. After a long time, there is a high probability that even they themselves will completely forget their names. But one person's name should not be forgotten. The so-called name may be endowed with a lot of meaning, and it should not be replaced by a cold string of letters or numbers no matter when or where it is. I don't want your name to be forgotten. And of course, I don't want my name to be forgotten either, especially being forgotten by myself." Sui Jing did not say the rest at that time, but Ma Jishi actually guessed the second half of the sentence from her calm eyes. That was the most words Sui Jing had ever exchanged with him. He knew that Sui Jing was not a talkative person. And precisely because of this, he kept this passage in his heart. Sui Jing, a captain, had done this, and her team members naturally followed suit. But they didn't dare to be too unruly like Sui Jing. They had to follow the rules set by the system within the larger framework. So they could only shout each other's names in their own team. So at the moment when Sui Jing called out his name, memories that had been buried for a long time rushed over like a landslide and a tsunami. Ma Jishi opened his mouth, and the muscles on his jaw trembled. Team leader? His call with a strong nasal voice not only surprised Sui Jing, but also Yu Huan couldn't believe it. Does she? You? What's wrong? He looked at Ma Chushi's red eyes and wondered. Look at this. Are you going to cry? Although Yu Huan didn't come in at the same time as Ma Chushi, he was only half a year late. When they worked together, he discovered that Ma Chushi admired Sui Jing more than other inspectors. However, the names of the first batch of censors are known to everyone among them. And Sui Jing is an outstanding person even among the chief inspectors. It is not surprising that Ma Chushi admires her, and even desperately wants to join the J-team. It was precisely because of this that he was very depressed during the time when Sui Jing's accident happened. And he even lost a lot of weight visibly. As Yu Huan himself. Of course, he didn't believe that his captain would defect. And he was big-hearted and didn't care about other people's rumors. He even felt that those rumors were actually deliberately released by the system. But as an inspector, he never speaks his mind. The matter of Sui Jing was considered taboo at that time. So no one would take the initiative to mention it in a game. Therefore, he also did not think that other inspectors would discuss such a prohibited incident. But Ma Chushi may be too sad and depressed. And he hasn't thought of so many details yet. What is unexpected is that when the rumors started spreading, he was actually slowly brainwashed to doubt the former captain, who he regarded as his idol, and occupied an important place in his heart. So much so that after he recovered later, the two forces in his heart were still fighting. So every time he saw Sui Jing, he looked so twisted that even he couldn't stand it. Yeah. Sui Jing nodded gently. Are you still complaining about my leaving? She asked slowly, pretending to understand. Anyway, Ma Jishi didn't know how much of her memory had been restored. As of now, no one except herself has much idea about this issue. No, Ma Chushi blurted out anxiously, his mouth moving faster than his brain. After finishing speaking, he realized that he had lost his temper and closed his mouth. Others may not understand, but in fact, he never complained about Sui Jing. No matter what choice she made, he had no right and would not say anything. It's just that Sui Jing disappeared into the system without saying a word, and he just felt a little mindlessly angry about it. That's all. It was probably like a certain family member I had been following suddenly, and calmly left behind my sense of powerlessness. He pondered for a while, then opened his mouth and asked, Captain, are you still leaving this time? Sui Jing was silent. She didn't know how to answer him. After all, leaving last time was not her intention. She was forcibly expelled from the system. The supervisors probably knew about this, but they didn't know the specific details. But these latter batch of inspectors were just concealed. And even she herself is not sure what the outcome will be if she enters again this time. Sui Jing's long, thick eyelashes trembled like butterfly wings, and then sighed. I'll tell you. If there really is such a day. If there is still a chance then. Ma Chushi frowned when he heard this. Captain. You. The sudden warning tone of Didi interrupted the conversation of the three. It just so happened that they had finished saying what they wanted to say. And if they continued to say it, they might touch the system's lighting points. The watches worn by Yu Huan and Ma Chushi flashed red and began to vibrate frequently. It's 477 contacting us. Yu Huan lowered his head and glanced at his watch. The three numbers 477 were displayed on the electronic dial. The inquiry must have yielded results. Boss, we still have something to do. So let's take a step forward. Yu Huan and Ma Chushi looked at each other, nodded toward Sui Jing, and ran in the direction where Meng Yutong left just now. Sui Jing got the news he wanted to know. So he turned and walked towards the hotel. But while they were chatting, she suddenly remembered something. Logically speaking, the current game system has been reformed. So the player with the lowest points in each instance will be punished. But the previous copy didn't seem to mention this. Is it possible that someone has already died in the dungeon? So I didn't look for anyone else? She hadn't paid that much attention before. After all, she wasn't the last one. So she wasn't afraid even if she was. But others may not be as fearless as she is. So, will this so-called punishment kill people? 3 days later. when Sui Jing entered the dungeon again. She was alone and did not see other players on the schedule. When she opened her eyes again from the darkness, what stood in front of her was a group of retro buildings with slightly modeled walls, but large areas. And the main color was milky white. On the top of the white building built in the middle stood several blood-red letters Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing only had one thought in his mind at that time. The name was very earthy. But the color looked a bit ominous. Sui Jing was standing outside the iron fence at this time. The design of this iron fence, which acts like a wall, is estimated to be a few years old. It is rusty, and some are deformed and bent. The fence was 2 meters high, but the gaps were not very close. From the outside, she could even easily see through the iron fence the courtyard inside, which was a mixture of cement and loess. There were many children's toys, and small toys of different styles placed in the yard. Amusement rides. This circle of iron fence completely separated Sui Jing from the entrance of the orphanage. Facing her was a tall, thick iron gate, but it looked exactly like the fence next to it. You couldn't tell that it was originally 2 gates unless you looked carefully. And there was actually an old-fashioned door lock hanging on the door to lock it. In other words, she couldn't get in at the moment, and could only wait where she was. But since this is the destination, the door will always be open. And Sui Jing is not in a hurry, and plans to go in by himself. Chapter 245 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing put her hands in her pockets and half leaned against her suitcase. Judging from the current situation, it is probably because everyone has not arrived yet. So the door has not been opened. So why on earth was she the only one who arrived here early this time? And where were the others? Sui Jing looked around aimlessly with his eyes. Except for the orphanage complex. Other houses in the distance seemed to be buried in the fog, and could not be clearly seen. Oh! It's here! I've already seen the dawn of victory. Sui Jing was waiting in boredom with her arms folded, when she finally heard someone speaking from the direction she came in before. Another voice then complained, "Nonsense! Look! The weather here is gloomy and gray. But there is no sign of dawn? Hey! It's just a metaphor. Do you understand the metaphor? At least we have reached our destination." I know. Let's go quickly. I don't know how you led the way. It's obviously a one-way street, and you can go somewhere else. Okay. Blame me. I don't know why I went somewhere else for no reason. Fortunately, the inspector reminded me. Otherwise I don't know where I would have gone. The man also seemed to have lingering fears. But the sky fell. He still had his mouth to hold it against. But I didn't ask you to follow me. You deserve it. After the talking stopped, Sui Jing saw several figures emerging from the darkness. There happened to be 3 men and 3 women in their group. And they might even know each other. Looking at Sui Jing like this, he seemed like the redundant one. Ah! It seems that someone has already arrived early. Sui Jing could probably tell from the position of the voice that it was the boy wearing the peaked cap who said it. Another young woman wearing a brown sweatshirt and dark jeans rolled her eyes at him. Of course, it would have been long ago as long as others hadn't gone astray like us. Oh! She's such a beauty. I like her. Someone in their team said loudly, striding towards where Sui Jing was. Just as Sui Jing stood up straight, he felt one of his arms being entangled. A piece of special softness pressed against her arm inadvertently, and she felt goosebumps all over her body for a moment. Sui Jing's rare eyes fell blankly on the lady holding her arm. The woman was probably only half a head shorter than her, with long black wavy hair hanging loosely on her back. She wore a fiery red half-slit cheongsam that reached her calf, revealing a section of fair and smooth skin on her legs. On her feet, she also wore a pair of black pointed-toe velvet high-heeled shoes with slender heels. The flaming red lips and the moving eyes are charming and charming. At this moment, Sui Jing's head was a little empty as she was hugged. She shrugged the tip of her nose as if nothing had happened and thought, has she always been dressed like this? Is it true that she won't get cold when she wears this? But generally speaking, people who dare to wear skirts in dungeons are not easy to get along with. She was very curious. How much real ability did this woman have? Madam, could you please let go first? Sui Jing gathered her thoughts and tried to pull out her arm. She was really not used to such a posture. She had never been so close to another person in her memory. However, the woman was extremely strong, and her arms actually exerted great force like iron pliers. If she insists on breaking free from the restraints of this lady's hands, the lady in the red skirt may sit on the ground in the next second. But it is so rude to treat a beautiful lady like this. But why is this person so familiar? They don't even exchange names. Strictly speaking, this can't be considered acquaintance. Who would jump on a stranger as soon as they meet? However, The lady didn't seem to realize there was anything inappropriate. She leaned her head lightly on Sui Jing's arm, and smiled with an intoxicated look on her face. Sui Jing also wore a black shirt, and a pair of slim straight suit pants today. The hem of her shirt was neatly tucked into the waistband of her suit trousers, and the simple and elegant two-finger white belt outlined a graceful curve to her slender and tight waist. She looked dignified and ascetic just by standing there. Beauty. Don't mind. Let me stick to you. The woman refused to let go, and instead tried harder to wrap her arms around Sui Jing's waist. My name is Suing. Beauty. Let me meet you. What's your name? Sui Jing easily blocked Su Ying's restless hands with his hands and said calmly, Madam, please respect yourself. Just when Sui Jing didn't know how to get Suing to let go, the other players finally came to her side. This moment made Sui Jing wonder why it took them so long to walk a short distance. Sister, let go. A young man wearing a brown woolen sweater also came forward and grabbed Su Ying's hand, forcefully pulling her away. How presumptuous of you to do that. I'm sorry. The young man bowed to Sui Jing and said sincerely, My sister has had this problem since she was a child. Regardless of whether she is a boy or a girl, whenever she sees a good-looking person, she has to go up and hug her. Why? I can't even pull it open. But because of the ladle-like image she has set for herself, she is still a little more restrained when it comes to boys. At most, he drools over others. Don't be the same as her. Xiaochen, what are you talking about? Suing rolled her eyes at the man dissatisfied. My love for beauty is something everyone has, he said while giving Sui Jing a wink. I wonder who sees a beauty and doesn't want to go up and post it. She is just brave enough to put her ideas into practice. Moreover, she privately thought that it would be more interesting to tease an iceberg beauty like Sui Jing, a flower of the high mountains. However, what she doesn't know is that Sui Jing is not a flower on the high mountain. In the eyes of most people who have seen her true face, she is just a good-looking but extremely daring psychopath. Nothing more. But exactly like this, if a lunatic has a beautiful face, he can confuse many people who go out without thinking. In fact, Sui Jing vaguely remembered that someone had commented on her in this way before she even entered the game. Their family system is very large and has many branches. Although her father was the apparent head of the family, there were always many people dissatisfied with their family. For example, her third uncle often picked on her father overtly or covertly. It's just that she has never received any benefits from her father. So much so that the third uncle even commented that everyone in their family is a life-threatening lunatic. The older ones are crazy. The younger ones are also crazy. However, Sui Jing never dared to agree with his third uncle's words. She didn't think that their family were all lunatics. But the means to achieve their goals were a little extreme. Yes. Just a little. Yes. Yes. The man said nonchalantly. I think if you had this face, you would have been beaten to paralysis. Sui Jing glanced sideways at the woman with a charming and affectionate smile, and felt her eyes twitching a little. The young man stretched out his hand politely and said, Let me introduce myself. My name is Suchen. Suchen had soft hair and some baby fat on his face. Like a student. I'm Sui Jing. Sui Jing stretched out his hand and shook it. Sui of Suizhu. Jing of Jingkong. It has been detected that all players have successfully arrived at the dungeon, and the mission report will now begin. Mission background. Sunshine Welfare Home is the largest public welfare home in Fushan City, housing many homeless children and teenagers. But the welfare home is not just a welfare home. There are always many unknown and disgusting secrets hidden in the orphanage. They hide in shadows, in corners, in dust, out of sight. As new volunteers in the welfare home, please work hard and be positive, loving and helpful. Main mission. Please survive 4 days safely in the orphanage. After 4 days, you can only leave the orphanage with the permission of the director of the orphanage. This copy contains many hidden side tasks, and side tasks are not mandatory. Players have the right to choose whether to trigger side tasks. Once a side quest is triggered and accepted, it cannot be changed and must be completed. This round of side missions has certain high risks, but high risks often come with high returns. Therefore, after completing a side task, you can get a chance to draw a card as a task reward. Maybe there will be unexpected gains. Warm reminder, please carefully check whether what everyone in the orphanage says is credible. Sometimes they tell the truth and sometimes they lie. If you have determined that they are indeed lying, do not comply with their request. Find valid reasons to reject them. Remember, don't provoke them when you are not completely sure of your escape, as the consequences will be serious. The game has officially started. All players, please be prepared. Chapter 246 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Fushan City? Sui Jing took a breath. The name sounded even more ominous. And this mission seemed simple. Only needing to survive safely for 4 days. But Sui Jing was very keen to notice that the system's announcement deliberately emphasized the sentence, "You can only leave after obtaining the consent of the director of the welfare home." After the system finished broadcasting, they saw the door of the orphanage open from the inside. And a middle-aged woman wearing a sky-blue vest came out. The woman walked to the iron gate surrounding the courtyard, took off the iron lock hanging on the iron gate from the inside, and opened the iron gate to both sides to create a passage. She walked to stand in front of all the players, smiled kindly at them, and then said, "You must be the new volunteers. You've been waiting for a long time." The woman stretched out her arm to guide the direction. "Come in with me, and we'll chat as we walk. If you have anything you want to ask me, you can just ask me." After she finished speaking, she was about half a step ahead of everyone, really leading the way for them. There are many children in our orphanage, based on the principle that it is best for each child to have a dedicated person to take care of it. The institution is short of manpower all year round. It is great to have your help now. But you also know that children have all kinds of personalities. I hope you can be more patient when dealing with them, and never lose your temper with them. Otherwise, these children will not have the love of their parents. If even you how pitiful they must be if they don't take good care of them. It's natural. The girl with a high ponytail in the team nodded in agreement with the woman in a vest, with a cheerful smile on her face. I like children best, as long as they don't turn into some weird species. Of course, that would be great. The woman glanced at the girl with satisfaction and sighed. If only everyone thought like you. Accidents like that before would never happen. The middle-aged woman obviously had something to say, but she didn't say it out loud. It whetted everyone's appetite. No. She doesn't want them to ask her proactively. Right? Sui Jing happened to be only a few dozen centimeters behind the woman. Hearing this, he said, "I would like to ask, are you the director of this welfare home?" Huh? Everyone else thought that Sui Jing would ask what happened at the women's welfare home. But they didn't expect that what she asked was the identity of the NPC in front of her. Haha. I'm not the dean. The woman smiled. I'm just a caregiver in the yard. I usually help the children clean up their rooms and toys, and occasionally help take care of them. Oh. Sui Jing nodded lightly and stopped asking questions. Then can we usually see the dean? Suing glanced at Sui Jing and asked. Sui Jing glanced at Suing without any trace, and then looked away casually. Maybe. The nurse replied honestly, although the director does not often appear in the orphanage. She will come to the orphanage every 3 or 5 times a month to inspect if nothing unexpected happens. I'll calculate the time. The nurse actually calculated in her mind. If you're lucky, you might be able to meet the dean tomorrow. Thank you. Suing thanked him with a smile. You're such a nice person. Where? The nurse waved her hand sheepishly. It's a trivial matter that everyone knows. But it doesn't help you much. But what do you want to do with the dean? The nurse asked curiously. Is it possible that you know the dean? I don't know. Suing shook his head confidently and smiled again. I just want to thank the dean in person. If it weren't for her, how would we have the opportunity to work as volunteers in such a luxurious orphanage? And thanks to her consent, we can come here to help. What she said was true, although this orphanage looked a little unlucky. In terms of decoration and layout, it was indeed quite luxurious. I heard that I received very good treatment while working in your welfare home. Is it true or false? Huh? The nurse opened her mouth in surprise. This was the first time she heard someone praise the welfare of the orphanage for so long. Even Sui Jing glanced at Suing in surprise. This person's ability to make random nonsense was almost as good as hers. Haha. You speak very well. The nurse laughed dryly, and then quickly took them to the orphanage, obviously not wanting to have too much communication with them. There can't be anything wrong with these people, right? Seeing the nurse's anxious look, Suing blinked in confusion. No. I can't let others think I'm mentally unstable on the first day. Right? Should she say it or not? She is quite self-aware. Suchin spread his hands and complained without mercy. It's not bad. Anyway, in the end, you will be thought to be mentally abnormal. That won't work. Suing spoke sternly. It doesn't matter that you are all acquaintances. But you can't let the beauty think that I'm not mentally healthy. In fact, I'm normal when I'm normal. Suchin rolled his eyes speechlessly, feeling deeply that his sister had said nonsense again. But Suing, who had just finished talking nonsense, didn't want to listen to what he said and ran to Sui Jing's side to get sticky. She must try her best to maintain her dignified image in the hearts of beautiful women. Beauty. Actually, I'm not like this usually, Suing explained to Sui Jing with a smile, and wanted to climb onto Sui Jing with both arms. I'm quite a stable person. However, Sui Jing calmly stopped any unnecessary movement of her hands, looked at her without even moving his eyebrows, and said calmly with an expressionless face, I believe you. You are normal. After saying that, he immediately followed. He stopped the pace of the nurse and left Suing alone in a daze. Huh? Su Ying's hands were frozen in midair, but she couldn't reach them. Why was this different from the plot she imagined? According to the plot she imagined, Sui Jing should have no choice but to let her hold him. But ignore her. He listened to her nonsense without any trouble. But a little smile couldn't help but appear in his eyes. Then she can drown in Sui Jing's eyes. Is this development wrong? I told you not to think too much. Su Chen walked up behind her and gave her a gentle push. Come on. Don't wait any longer. I'm begging you. Can you be more steady all day long? Su Chen shook his head with a gentle look on his face. I really don't know if you are my sister or not. Look. That is the special administrator for all the children in our hospital. If you don't mind, you can call her Teacher Zhang. The nurse took them into a toy house and pointed to a woman in the middle of the room. At present, they could only see the back of the person and cannot tell her age. They could see that the so-called Teacher Zhang was surrounded by a group of children of varying ages, but they were all around 10 years old. Teacher Zhang, I have brought all the new volunteers here. The nurse walked up to Teacher Zhang first and said low, catching her attention. Can you think of a better way to arrange their tasks? It turns out that the volunteers are here. No wonder I heard some noise outside just now. After hearing this, Teacher Zhang raised his head and looked at them for a few times, and then smiled at them. You are all so young. Low to you. Hello. Sui Jing responded to her politely with a gentle nod. The teacher's face looked very young, but his smile was not very pleasing, but rather scary. Especially those eyes that were so dark that no light could escape from them. Hello. Low. Other players also responded to her greetings one by one. Teacher Zhang didn't pay special attention to other people's greetings. She asked the children to be quiet for a while. Even though the children were not noisy, she stood up on her own and walked slowly to Sui Jing. Dear volunteer, why don't you smile? Children don't like cold guests. Are you asking her? Why don't you laugh? Maybe it's because she doesn't like to laugh by nature. Although it was true that Sui Jing didn't want to talk to her in his heart. He thought that the game had just begun after all, and it was better to do less than to do more. Sui Jing still raised the corners of his mouth slightly, preparing to smile at her politely. No. After struggling for a while, Sui Jing still couldn't force out a kind smile. Nothing else. She just couldn't laugh at the moment. I'm sorry. I didn't expect anything funny. Sui Jing pursed his lips, planning to let it go. Chapter 247 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Cough. Teacher Zhang obviously didn't expect Sui Jing to be so disrespectful, and coughed twice in embarrassment. Then the topic changed. Well, the nurse must have mentioned it to you. Our rule is that every child must be cared for by a dedicated person, Teacher Zhang said. The other children have already been taken care of. That's all. Teacher Zhang pointed to the group of quiet children behind him. There are only a few of them left who haven't found the right person to look after them. It's just right for each of you to take care of one, Teacher Zhang said and shouted to the group of children. Children, come quickly. This time we have really found new brothers and sisters specifically for you. Then the children all ran over in a swarm and gathered around Teacher Zhang. Everyone blinked and stared at Sui Jing and the others curiously. It was as if he was very curious about their arrival. However, Sui Jing accurately grasped the key points in a whole sentence. Why does Teacher Zhang call them newcomers? Although they are indeed new here. If it goes according to what she said before, at least for the group of children in front of him, they should be meeting people of this status for the first time. Or maybe they are not the first people to take care of these children. The settings for this copy of the game are not reset either. Sui Jing didn't think about it. So she simply asked, is it possible that these children have never been looked after before? She pretended to be ignorant and innocent. Then you usually take care of them? So it's really hard for you. Teacher Zhang looked at Sui Jing with an exploratory eye for a few seconds, but could not find any expression of laughter on her face. And then replied, yes. These children are not very lucky and timid. Very. Every time I meet new volunteers, they don't dare to come forward. So the previous volunteers are chosen by other children. That's why we left them until the end. Fortunately, you are here, and now someone can finally accompany them. Teacher Zhang raised his hand and touched the hair of a boy in the narrator's head. I can feel a little more at ease. An invisible light flashed across Sui Jing's eyes. What peace of mind. Then pray that you can really feel at ease. And why on earth are these children left unattended? It's really hard to say whether they are really timid or if they have some hidden agenda. Then why didn't we see the other volunteers and the children they brought with them? Where have they gone? Sui Jing asked. Since Teacher Zhang said that volunteers have come to take care of other children before, it is normal that the volunteers cannot be found, and they will either disappear or leave. But what about those kids? Why didn't I see anyone? Sui Jing had a gut feeling that there was a high probability that something had happened to the previous volunteers. Or there is another possibility. Teacher Zhang is lying to them. In fact, there are no other children at all. Sui Jing did not dare to make any rash judgments. It was up to them to find out the truth on their own. Let's first listen to how Teacher Zhang made it up with them. Teacher Zhang paused. They should all be resting in their rooms right now. Not all our children live in this building. You can also see that our orphanage is very big. Many children will also live in several other apartment buildings. The building you are in now is the main activity place for the children. They eat and play here. But when they go to bed, they go back to their original apartment. She kept silent about the other volunteers. The players were too ignorant to ask further questions, which would do them no good. Don't bother them by going to other apartment buildings. Teacher Zhang emphasized. Real or false? Su Chen didn't believe it and muttered to himself. Teacher Zhang? Su Ying suddenly said, looking at the group of children doubtfully. You said we have exactly one child each. But there are only 7 of us here. But you have a total of 8 children here? Uh-huh. That's not a problem. Teacher Zhang looked careless. With the extra child, one of you will have to take care of one more child. Don't worry. They are very well behaved and won't cause you any trouble. As long as you teach them well, they will be obedient. But, who wants to have one more child? Asked another man in the team. Besides Su Chen, wearing a white sweater. The question he asked was not unreasonable. If he had to say it, no one would take the initiative to take care of an extra child. After all, judging from the information they currently have, no one knows whether these children will cause them any trouble. If anything, one child is already very reluctant, and adding another would not double the risk. So for a while, no one took the initiative to take over this job. Since no one is willing, Sui Jing will not seek unhappiness on his own. How could she not think of things that everyone else could figure out? Unless she was designated as the one who could do it. Sui Jing really didn't want to cause herself more trouble with uncertainty. It's not that she is greedy for life, but there is really too little information given to her now. There was no need for her to be so all-encompassing from the beginning. It would certainly be beneficial to her if she could see more of the situation. Isn't there anyone willing to take care of one more child? Teacher Zhang looked around at everyone's faces and asked. What cute kids. I saw the players shaking their heads and saying nothing. But no one answered her words. At this point, Teacher Zhang breathed out regretfully. In that case, let me choose. She first paused in front of the girl in the white cap who first spoke to her, and then continued to move away after seeing the girl's evasive eyes. Teacher Zhang walked back and forth in front of them. After wondering for several times, she still stood still in front of Sui Jing. It's just you. Teacher Zhang said to Sui Jing. Please take care of one more child. As she said this, she wanted to pat Sui Jing's shoulder to comfort her. Although it may be a little harder. I guess you won't have the heart to refuse such a cute child. She lowered her voice and said, as the saying goes, he who knows the current affairs is a hero. As expected, Sui Jing raised his eyelids and glanced at her, with a dark meaning in the corners of his eyes. Is this threatening her? Okay. Sui Jing avoided her touch without moving, and nodded slightly in agreement. Then he lowered his eyelids and glanced at the 2 children. He spoke slowly and without emotion. I will take good care of them. Huh. Teacher Zhang took back his hand that was hanging in the air and laughed, pretending to be nonchalant again, and curled his lips with satisfaction. That's good. Su Ying, who was standing aside, was no longer calm. She clearly witnessed this treacherous NPC trying to touch the beauty's shoulder. What is tolerable is unbearable. If Su Chen hadn't pulled her, she would have gone up and pulled Sui Jing apart. Xiaogua, Xiaomi, come here. Teacher Zhang did not feel Su Ying's sour gaze. and instead pulled the child who was leaning slightly outside to Sui Jing. Can you just follow this, sister, from today on? Sister has just arrived, and there are still many unfamiliar places. As the young master's here, you should take care of your sister more. Okay? Sui Jing lowered his eyes and saw a boy and a girl standing at his feet. Both of them are cute and well-behaved. The boy is holding a rabbit doll in his arms, while the girl is holding a humanoid puppet in her arms. The two pea-sized children stared at Sui Jing with bright eyes, as if they were reconsidering whether to accept Teacher Zhang's proposal. This sister doesn't look easy to talk to at all. But, after waiting for a while, the two little beans calmed down, nodded, and spoke softly and waxily. Good. Then go to sister. Teacher Zhang pushed the children towards Sui Jing and asked them to stand on both sides of Sui Jing. But you must remember, you must not run around with your sister. You know where you are not allowed to go. You must always remember to remind this sister. After all, she doesn't seem to follow the rules very well. Teacher Zhang complained silently in his heart. Each of the other players is then assigned a child. All the members stared at the child beside them, not knowing what to do now. You all have someone to take care of now. Right? Now let me take you to the room to take a rest. Teacher Zhang waved to the nurse, who brought them in before, and said to her, you take them go to the children's respective rooms. After saying that, he turned around and explained to them, we all have 2 children in one room here, so occasionally it may be a little noisy. You must teach them patiently and gently, and don't lose your temper with them, and don't let them feel it's a grievance. If they have any additional requirements, as long as they are not too excessive, please try your best to satisfy them. Oh, that's right. Teacher Zhang suddenly said in surprise, I forgot to tell you. There are no requirements for other matters in our welfare home for the time being. But there is one thing you must keep in mind. During mealtime, you must take our cute children to the restaurant on time. You will not bear to let our cute children go hungry. Right. After saying that, he asked the nurse to take them upstairs. The nurse took them upstairs, told them their house numbers, left the keys, and hurriedly left. They were left in silence facing each door. The other information in this sentence is not important. In fact, judging from the children assigned to them, except for Sui Jing, they have already been divided into 2 groups. So when she opened the door and saw the double-decker children's bed and a separate single bed inside, Sui Jing knew she was truly the chosen one, chosen by fate. The superfluous one. Chapter 248, Sunshine Welfare Institute. Beauty, I don't want to leave you. Suing flashed past her and howled like a drama queen. Her movements and demeanor at the moment were completely different from her dress. Too far. Too far. Sister, please don't embarrass yourself. Su Chen simply didn't look at it. It's obviously right next door. Why does it have to be like a separation between life and death? Obviously, we just met each other not long ago. So he ignored Su Ying's pretentious behavior, apologized to Sui Jing, and dragged his sister into the room. After the farce was over, Sui Jing looked at the bed in the room with a cold eyebrow. He dragged the trolley box in and placed it next to the single bed. After she walked indoors, she realized that the 2 little cubs had not followed her in. They were standing stiffly at the door of the room, staring at her motionlessly. Come in and close the door. Sui Jing didn't bother to speculate on the mental activities of the 2 children. She casually sat on the edge of the bed and said in a cold tone. The little girl glanced at the boy timidly, and when she saw the boy nodded slowly, she stood up on tiptoes with her short legs and closed the door. It's closed. The little girl stretched out her hand and pulled the little boy to Sui Jing's side. She blinked her round eyes and said to her in a sweet voice, I have to say that the little girl is indeed quite lovable. It is white, tender and round, just like a white and tender snow yang. It's a pity that Sui Jing always thought that he didn't have the intention to love children. His misty eyes fell on them, and he responded, yes. Do you want to sleep? Sui Jing asked. It would be better if they could sleep on their own, so she didn't have to go out of her way to coax them. However, the 2 little beans shook their heads together, indicating that they did not want to sleep at all. Then what do you want to do? Sui Jing has never taken care of children, and he doesn't know how to get along with children appropriately. Although she had a biological brother, Sui Yi was obedient when he was young and would not come to her to disturb her at all. Sister, can you tell us a story? Seeing that Sui Jing was not that scary, the little girl gradually became bolder. She stepped forward and gently pulled Sui Jing's sleeves with her 2 white doe-like hands. The ground spoke. For ordinary people, Their hearts would melt when they see such a cute and well-behaved child. What story? Fairy tale? But how could she tell a story? But considering that Teacher Zhang had just said that she would try to satisfy their wishes, Sui Jing could not refuse them directly. Well, taking care of children is such a hassle. What's even worse is that she has 2 more here. Sui Jing stared at the little girl in silence for a long time. Then looked at the little boy next to him, who pursed his lips and stared at her eagerly. Then he sighed very softly, picked up the little girl with both hands, and placed her there, on the bed. What story do you want to hear? Then he turned around and motioned for the little boy to sit over. But what surprised her was that the little boy knew how to measure things. He did not sit directly on Sui Jing's bed, but moved a small bench from the side and sat down next to Sui Jing's legs. We will listen to whatever my sister says, the little boy said sensibly. Sui Jing did not expect that the NPC this time would be of this style. It was really surprising. Sui Jing thought for a while, and suddenly had an idea, with a delicate light shining in his eyes. I can tell you a story, but we are still strangers now. Don't we need to get to know each other first? Are you right? When the 2 children heard what Sui Jing said, they both wrinkled up their faces and started thinking. This sister seems to have a point. The teacher also said that you should not talk to strangers casually. But, aren't you a stranger? The little boy said in a sweet voice. Teacher Zhang even knows you. But you don't know me, Sui Jing coaxed, and I don't know you either. How can I tell a story to a child I don't know? You should at least let me know your names. Right? Although Sui Jing had no experience in dealing with children, he was still good at coaxing people. No wonder Qi Yin once said that Sui Jing's mouth is a liar. When it comes to clichés, no one can escape them, and they get caught in them accidentally. Not to mention these 2 little ones. Sometimes even adults like them may not realize it. Sure enough, the little boy's frown suddenly became clear, and he said loudly, let's get to know each other. My name is Qi Xiaogui, and I am 8 years old. My name is Qi Xiaomi. I am 7 years old this year. Their age matches their appearance very well, and one can tell at a glance that they are still very young. Are you siblings? Sui Jing asked. No. Qi Xiaomi shook his head. Oh. Sui Jing understood. Since they were not brother and sister, their last name was either not specially arranged by the welfare home, or it was accidental. Yes, the 2 of them really don't look very similar. What about sister? What's her name? Qi Xiaogui realized that both of them had already told her, but Sui Jing had no intention of telling them her name. Children as young as 7 or 8 already have certain thinking abilities. Sui Jing raised the corners of his lips. I told you. Do you know what those 2 words are? Well, Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaogui both hesitated. But we have told you our names. You can't lie to us. Huh? Sui Jing chuckled, then remember. My name is Sui Jing. Do you know what those 2 words are? I don't know. The 2 shook their heads honestly. It's okay. Sui Jing touched Qi Xiaomi's hair. You'll know when you grow up. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaogui both listened to Sui Jing's words in confusion. They will understand why when they grow up. Will sister stay here when we grow up? Qi Xiaomi asked innocently. What? Sui Jing was distracted for a moment, not expecting Qi Xiaomi to ask this. Actually, we all know that you won't stay here for a long time, and you will all disappear at once. The child is young and the logic of her words is still a bit unclear. But in the end, it is not difficult to understand what she means. I saw many other brothers, sisters, uncles and aunts coming here before, but they disappeared after a while. I asked the teachers and caregivers, but they all refused to tell me. Do you think they got lost and couldn't find their way back? Why do you think so? Sui Jing had an intuition that Qi Xiaomi must know something, but he couldn't express it clearly and accurately. The dean's aunt told us not to run outside the orphanage. She said that if we ran outside, we would get lost and we would not be able to return to the orphanage safely. Qi Xiaogui replied after Qi Xiaomi's words. That's it, Sui Jing thought. Maybe what Qi Xiaogui said was true. And it was also true that he would get lost once he left the orphanage. But there were definitely other reasons for the disappearance of those players in the past. Except for those who successfully cleared the level and left the dungeon. The rest, it's really hard to say. Did any brothers and sisters play with you before? Sui Jing asked. The 2 little beans shook their heads. No. Teacher Zhang said to let the brothers and sisters choose first. And then it's our turn after they finish. But those brothers and sisters will talk to us when they see us. But we don't know anything. So they ignore us. It seems that Teacher Zhang really didn't lie to them. Then why haven't you seen your brothers and sisters who live with you? If I were still in the orphanage, I wouldn't have seen them. We don't know? She Xiaobo was also confused. Teacher Zhang never tells us these things. She said we should be content with having someone to play with. And let us not worry about it so much. Okay. Sui Jing didn't embarrass them. From the looks of it, they didn't look like they could lie. They probably really didn't know. Sister knows. It makes sense. Even an NPC would not tell a group of children some important news. Sister, please don't run outside the orphanage. You won't be able to find your way back by then. Qi Xiaomi moved closer to Sui Jing and whispered. It's really interesting. I didn't expect that one day I would need a child to remind me not to get lost. Okay. Sui Jing pinched their cheeks, which felt good. Thank you for the reminder. You're welcome. Qi Xiaobo said with a smile. We like you very much. Sister, why do you like me? It's just the first day we met. Sui Jing was a little confused. It is impossible for a child to like her just because she is good-looking. Because you are very good to us. You can talk to us, and you are not afraid of us. Qi Xiaobo replied, although you were a bit scary at first with a cold face and no smile. But you didn't scold us or ignore us. We're also going to tell stories that are different from everyone else's. Sui Jing, who had a cold face and was a bit scary, I didn't know for a moment whether he was praising himself or not. It can be inferred from his words that in the past, some players would still panic because they were NPCs, or use them as clues to clear the level. Once they couldn't figure it out, they would be immediately disliked, even if they are just a kid. It's human nature. After all, no one can tell whether an NPC that was a child 1 second in the game will turn into something else the next second. However, why did Qi Xiaobo suddenly say that people in the past were afraid of him? Didn't he just say that no one had stayed with them? If they just talked to each other, those players have gone through a lot anyway, so they shouldn't be afraid of them easily. That's it. Bug? Okay. We're done talking for the day. You guys go and get some sleep. When you wake up, you can get up and have dinner. Sui Jing urged without leaving any trace. Sister is very tired from the journey and needs to rest for a while. She hoped that they could quickly finish telling the story. Okay. The two children agreed in unison, actually forgetting about asking Sui Jing to tell them a story. Sui Jing, who had escaped the danger of telling stories, let out a sigh of relief. After all, little kids are still easy to deceive. So it's okay. There's no need to tell them stories. Chapter 249 Sunshine Welfare Institute. It was rare for Sui Jing to have some free time to rest. The two children obediently climbed onto their beds and covered themselves with quilts. It seems inappropriate to go out at this time, and I'm not sure if anything bad will happen if I wake up the child. So she had no choice but to quietly open the suitcase and take out a pair of light blankets. Also preparing to take a short nap. I think there won't be any surprises in this short period of time. But I still have to be careful not to completely let down my guard. Ta. Sui Jing's original intention was just to close her eyes and lean on the bedside to take a nap for a while. But with the regular and heavy ticking sounds coming from the clock in the house, she only felt that her eyelids were getting heavier and heavier, and her mind was getting more and more confused, and gradually lost all sense of autonomy. The moment before her will completely fell silent. Sui Jing suddenly remembered that she did not see any clock or other furnishings in this room when she came in. So, where do these sounds of clock movement that seem so close at hand come from? Before Sui Jing could figure it out, her eyelids had been completely closed, and she was half leaning on the bedside so peacefully. Even her breathing was so soft that it was almost inaudible. She fell asleep lifelessly like a white porcelain doll. Sui Jing looked around calmly at the vast whiteness around her. It was not just the kind of white that was filled with mist, but there was a soft light all around. Apart from that, there were no other objects. She didn't know what she was doing. It's somewhere again. She only knew that she was in an empty closed space at the moment. It should be closed. After all, she could not find the boundary. Even the soles of her feet were covered in a thick yet bright milky white halo. But in this mist, she actually saw a cinnabar red iron door suddenly appearing in the space. Sui Jing calmly stretched out her hand. She knew it was her hand, but it still seemed to be covered with a layer of blurry white light. Sure enough, she felt that she must be dreaming. Chief Inspector J, do you know what you did again? The cold, mechanical sound of the system suddenly sounded in the empty room. Of course I know. There was an indifferent response. Sui Jing watched helplessly as his former self walked in through that door, wearing the straight black inspector uniform as before. It's just that that extremely familiar face looks a little more immature than it does now. In the vast whiteness, other things gradually emerged clearly. Sui Jing saw that he walked directly to a set of red-brown tables and chairs, pulled out the chairs and sat down. Then why are you doing this? The system asked. You clearly know that since he violated the established rules, he will naturally be punished accordingly. It has been a year since you first entered the survival system, and you should know how the system works better than anyone else. You know better than anyone what kind of punishment you will receive for such behavior. It's just a bit of physical pain. It's not the first time. Sui Jing took out a pair of hand-width electronic handcuffs from the drawer with a stern expression and put them on his wrists naturally, pretending that he didn't hear the last thing it said. In one sentence, I think this rule setting has absolute disadvantages. If you don't pay special attention to this, almost most people will violate this rule. She was familiar with the movements of putting on handcuffs, and she was very familiar with them. It seems like there is no shortage of work. Since it is a shortcoming, it needs to be corrected. Even if, as you said, there are flaws in the game rules and mechanisms. You should not intervene without authorization to break the balance of the game and prevent the game from proceeding normally. Even though what Sui Jing said made sense, the system remained unmoved. Sui Jing listened and slowly walked closer to her former self. She lowered her eyes and silently stared at the electronic handcuffs on her wrists. The pain in her subconscious made her feel uncomfortable even without that memory. He frowned. It hurts. Those handcuffs must be so painful on your wrists. Although Sui Jing didn't even twitch the corners of her mouth, she could almost see her skin that had been burned and reddened by the high temperature under the handcuffs. In the past, Sui Jing forced himself to endure the burning pain that constantly penetrated the flesh from his wrists, and answered the system in a calm tone. If I really do what you said and don't intervene, then this game will the people inside are already dead. That's none of your business. Sui Jing looked at it, and suddenly curled up the corners of his mouth. It seemed that his temper had not changed at all over the years. I know that you don't care at all about the life and death of these players, she said again. I'm a little curious. What are you interested in? And what is the purpose of building this place? What good do those things you do to you? To be honest, not only Sui Jing at the time, but also Sui Jing now, is very interested in this issue. Besides, she was also very curious about the U in her mouth. The system was silent for a long time after Sui Jing finished speaking, and then continued, how long can you endure it? Just when Sui Jing thought he could hear the system's answer, it suddenly changed the topic. Heh. Sui Jing sneered coldly. I don't have to worry about it anymore. You won't die anyway. Right? Even if I am dying with my last breath, don't you still have a way to save me? At that time, she was full of yin and yang in her words, as if she was not dealing with the system. Although she dislikes the system very much now, she doesn't seem to be as emotionally exposed as she was then. Are you angry? The system can only judge whether a person's mood has changed significantly through the changes in the nervous system in the human body and brain, and the changes in hormones in the body. Sui Jing's normal emotions were hard to distinguish. Not to mention that the punishment at this moment also caused hormone disorders in her body, so that the system could not distinguish whether she had abnormal mood swings from her body. Of course not. Sui Jing was so painful that cold sweat broke out on his forehead, but his tone was still calm and light. Why do you think I would be angry over such a trivial matter? Although I don't know how true what she said is true, but since I can't make a decision for the time being, the system doesn't intend to delve into it further. The system didn't know it at the time, but Sui Jing, standing here many years later, understood it completely in an instant. She really didn't have the extra energy to be angry at that time, but more of a deep sense of powerlessness enveloped her heart. She only realized that she could do nothing, like a bird with broken wings imprisoned within a small area, and the system is a cage specially built for her, or them. So when she was so radical at that time, besides being young and energetic, she must have known something else. But after all, he is still too young and does not know how to hide his thoughts better. However, to this day, she still doesn't know what the system is doing, and what secrets they have that cannot be told. It can be clearly noticed that the current system no longer seems to trust her as much as before. There was a crack in the trust between her and the system. What exactly are them? Is it a mysterious group organization? Or, bang! Sui Jing was startled by the sudden noise. She raised her eyes, and found that she was lying unconscious on the vermilion wooden table. It looked like he might have fainted from the pain. The handcuffs on his wrists were automatically unlocked with a click, revealing a circle of burned red skin on his fair wrists. A pervasive alarm sounded in the huge space. Seeing this scene, Sui Jing was actually a little emotional. It turned out that he had fainted from the pain. At that time, my physical fitness seemed not as strong as it is now. You are not supposed to be like this. You have to be corrected. Chapter 250 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing opened her eyes suddenly. Her eyes were still a little distracted as she stared at the ceiling, as if her consciousness was suddenly pulled out of a dream, and she looked a little confused. By the way, does the last sentence the system said have any hidden meaning? Ding 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 ding. The metal doorbell attached to the door rang twice in succession. Sui Jing was fully awake at this time. She glanced sideways at the direction where the two children were sleeping. Sure enough, Qi Xiaogui and Qi Xiaomi also heard the doorbell. They rubbed their eyes and climbed up from their little beds. Stand up. Qi Xiaogui quickly put on her coat and shoes alone and stood aside while Qi Xiaomi and Sui Jing packed them away. Sui Jing didn't have anything to deal with. She just folded the blanket covering herself neatly and placed it at the end of the bed. Then she walked to the child's bed and took Qi Xiaomi down from the top bunk. She placed it on the edge of Qi Xiaogui's bed and let her put on her shoes. Are you awake? Sui Jing thought that he was not a very gentle person. But when faced with the immature and obedient child in front of him, he unexpectedly gained a rare patience. Yeah. Qi Xiaomi nodded, yawned, and skillfully bent down to put on his shoes. Sister. Qi Xiaomi called Sui Jing softly after putting on her shoes. Seeing that Sui Jing didn't react, he looked up and stared at her side face with a little pout in thought for a while. Then stepped forward and reached out to hold Sui Jing's hand, the hand hanging at the side. I'll take you to eat together. She knew that Sui Jing would definitely not be able to find a place to eat. But her hands were too small and could not completely wrap Sui Jing's palm, and could only barely hold a few of her long and cold fingers. Sui Jing lowered his eyes and glanced at his grasped hand. The pinched fingertips subconsciously moved, but in the end, he resisted and did not break free. Qi Xiaogui. Let's go! Sui Jing raised his chin and waited for Qi Xiaogui to catch up with her, then led Qi Xiaomi out. Ah, beauty. As soon as Sui Jing walked out of the door, she was surrounded by warmth and softness. The impact forced her to take half a step back uncontrollably. She was already holding Qi Xiaomi with one hand, but Su Ying's pounce forced her to put her other hand on Su Ying's back to steady herself. Miss Su Ying. Sui Jing raised her eyebrows slightly, paused for a moment on what she wanted to say, and then had no choice but to change her words. She didn't let her go immediately, but just sighed, be safe. If someone really knocked her down here, she couldn't imagine how embarrassing it would be. I'm sorry. I couldn't hold it back, and I hugged her. Before Su Yinglan let go, his cheek pressed hard against Sui Jing's shoulder and neck, and then he reluctantly let go of his arms. Huh? Sui Jing chuckled and said, Am I some kind of strange treasure? Can you still resist it? Although her words sounded joking at first, anyone with a discerning eye could see that she was really not joking. She was really confused by Su Ying's series of behaviors. Even though Su Chen had explained it to her a long time ago, she still couldn't understand it. It's hard to say, Su Ying said with a smile. And in a blink of an eye, he saw Qi Xiaomi, who was holding Sui Jing tightly. Hey, little kid. Could it be that we are from the same group of people? Qi Xiaomi was really wronged. He was just a child. How could he think so far? However, Qi Xiaomi just held Sui Jing's finger at first. But after Su Ying hugged her, she tightly held Sui Jing's arm, as if she was afraid that she would snatch Sui Jing away. Even though Sui Jing had no awareness of emotions, he still felt that the atmosphere around him seemed a bit strange. Okay. Su Chen quickly squeezed in between a few people to separate them. Let's go down first and talk later. Okay. Su Ying shrugged. Then let's go down first. Then he said to the child following him, Let's go. Stop looking around. When he passed by Qi Xiaomi, he rubbed the top of her head in a playful manner, turning Qi Xiaomi's neatly combed hair into a chicken coop. Well, Qi Xiaomi felt that her hair was messed up and curled her mouth, looking like she wanted to cry. Alas, Sui Jing stretched out his hand to roughly smooth Qi Xiaomi's hair, looking at Su Ying and others' backs as they walked away. He raised a wicked smile at the corner of his mouth that was not easily noticed by others, and whispered comforting words, Don't cry. My hair is that's all. She quietly conveyed information to Qi Xiaomi with her eyes. Just take a chance and mess up her hair later. And it looks like she has taken care of her hair for a long time. She will definitely be very angry after messing it up. After saying this, Sui Jing winked affirmatively. So, don't cry. You're such a big man. You should think of your own solution. But don't go too far. Otherwise, I won't care if she takes revenge on you later. Sui Jing's main attitude is to watch a show. Huh? Qi Xiaomi blinked and looked at Sui Jing. May I? After receiving Sui Jing's affirmative reply, she smiled brightly again. Qi Xiaogua, who was following them, heard every word of their conversation clearly, and his throat rolled up and down nervously. Although he didn't know if it was right to do this. What he knew was that the sister named Suing just now was probably going to suffer. Moreover, this beautiful sister named Sui Jing seemed to be really evil-minded. Sui Jing and the others were the last to arrive. By the time they sat down in the cafeteria, other players and children had already found their seats and sat down. There are only 3 seats left at a very long dining table, which should be reserved for them. However, they were still the ones sitting at this table eating. It was said that there were other children in the orphanage. But when it was time to eat, they still didn't see any of them. The nurse who brought them in before, and the teacher Zhang they saw in the house were also missing. Don't others need to dine with them? Will your teacher have dinner with you? Sui Jing leaned into Qi Xiaomi's ear and asked in a low voice. No. They will wait until we finish eating before eating. Qi Xiaomi replied in a low voice. Have you ever seen them eating together? Sui Jing asked. As expected, Qi Xiaomi shook his head. After eating, the teachers will not allow us to stay down there. Someone will take us all to the room. Then how do you know they ate after you finished? I've seen it. Qi Xiaomi's voice was even lower, like a mosquito moaning, as if he had done something bad secretly. I once. Qi Xiaomi's unspoken words stopped abruptly, and he stared blankly at the group of people walking towards them wearing chef uniforms, who came to serve them food. Each of them had a variety of dishes and food in their hands. Sui Jing immediately understood that this was not a good time for Qi Xiaomi to talk. So she also raised her head, her eyes hovering over the dishes placed on the table as if nothing had happened. Chapter 251 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing clearly didn't feel hungry at all before the dishes were served. But now, as she watched the dishes being served on the table, she felt as if her appetite was suddenly aroused. However, the appearance of these foods is not to say that they are exquisite. To say that they are ordinary is to praise them. If you insist on saying so, they can even be considered bad. Large and irregular pieces of vegetables and meat were randomly placed on the porcelain plate. The meat pieces were still sizzling and leaking oil. There were still oil droplets scattered around the edge of the porcelain plate. You should pay more attention to it at ordinary times. Sui Jing would find it boring at first glance. It only takes a quick glance to tell that the chef put little thought into his preparation. But now, Sui Jing swallowed softly. She has never had any particularly strong appetite needs. But now she can't control herself. The aroma of strange food quickly fills her nasal cavity, and her body's rapidly secreted insulin and peptide hormones continue to stimulate her body. Her brain caused her to experience intense hunger. This feeling is very strange and is not controlled by one's own consciousness. Sui Jing clenched her fists with her 10 fingers and dug her neatly manicured nails into her palms. She did not let go of her fingertips until she made deep marks on her palms. The sharp pain finally made her regain her consciousness a little. Why are there no vegetables? After all the dishes were served, a slender young girl asked. I think she should control her diet and not eat too much meat. Sui Jing glanced sideways at the red wine glasses placed in the hands of all players and the empty plates in front of everyone. The dishes on the table were all meat dishes, and as expected, there was no trace of green on the plate. But, although she felt a little hungry now, she actually didn't want to touch the food at all. These players were really greedy for the food. But the children didn't react at all, and just ate the food on their plates quietly. Moreover, these things placed in the middle of the table seemed to be specially prepared for players like them. And children do not eat the same food as them, because in front of each child was a plate of delicate porridge and a small cake about the size of their palm. By the way, why can children drink porridge, but they don't even see any grains of rice? What? Are they not worthy? Excuse me. Could you please briefly introduce to us what these dishes are? Sui Jing resisted the desire to take chopsticks and asked the muscular man in chef's clothes standing behind her. The man raised his eyes and stared at Sui Jing dully. After a long while, he took action on Sui Jing's words and began to introduce them one by one. After a while, the man finished introducing everyone and stood back to his original position. In fact, the names of these foods are just normal dishes that they have seen before, but the goods are wrong and they are scrawled. Sui Jing has an inexplicable resistance to these foods, but it seems unreasonable not to eat them at all. Not to mention that other players may be surprised and incomprehensible to her behavior, and it will be cumbersome to explain it. Based on these points, the chefs, who are watching them behind their backs, may not agree easily. However, what Sui Jing did not expect was that she still had some self-control and thinking ability left. But other players were not so lucky. The aroma of these foods seemed to have substance, making everyone except her stare at the dishes on the table, like a hungry wolf who suddenly saw a fat and tender lamb, and was already salivating. The remaining sanity was already on the verge of collapse, and collapsed at one blow. Is it possible that he is going to lose his mind soon? Maybe there is something really wrong with these foods. Sui Jing bit her lower lip in confusion. Now things were getting a little troublesome. She had to find a way to get out of here quickly. Otherwise, remove these things first. Sui Jing blinked indifferently. She knew very well that the sound was not made by her. There was already a young man in their team who couldn't bear it anymore and picked up his chopsticks to pick up one of the plates of meat. It's delicious. After eating one piece, the young man couldn't wait to pick up the second piece, as if the plate was not just a piece of meat, but as if it were some unparalleled delicacy. The sound of his chewing seemed to suddenly turn on some kind of magical switch, causing the others sitting around the table to no longer be restrained and began to pick up their bowls and chopsticks and start eating happily. Even Su Ying was not immune. But in comparison, her eating appearance is still a little more gentle. If they are allowed to eat like this, big problems may occur. Even though she thought so, Sui Jing still made no move, and the eyes of the chefs behind her fell like thorns on her back. She pretended not to notice their stares and took a sip of the red wine in her hand. Judging by the behavior of the rest of them, these dishes are probably addictive and hard to stop once you get involved. But there seems to be nothing wrong with the wine. And after she took a sip of wine, the feeling of gaze on her back became less intense. Don't these people know that red wine is okay? She immediately realized that not only was there nothing wrong with the wine, it seemed to be able to barely alleviate the attraction brought by these dishes. After all, she no longer felt that completely uncontrollable hunger when she smelled food. Sui Jing now figured it all out. But what puzzled her was that the setting of this game was really so simple. So simple that the answer was clearly placed next to the question. Even if no one could discover the answer for a while, she still felt it was too easy. Is the system really so kind? But time was tight, and she couldn't think about it. If he didn't let the other stop, he might even die. Never mind. Sui Jing sighed lightly, and decided to solve the immediate trouble first and talk about the rest later. She put down her wine glass, and looked around at the other people who were having a good meal. She didn't know if they could still listen to what she said. So Sui Jing cleared his throat and said, "Stop just eating the food. Drink some wine to moisten your throat." But what she said was all nonsense. Who would wet their throat with red wine now? She just wanted to avoid arousing the suspicion and attention of the group of people behind her. The group of men who simply monitored them really didn't think much about it. And Sui Jing's goal was considered accomplished. Oh, okay. Fortunately, although the other players were eating happily, they could still barely listen to what Sui Jing said. And he perfunctorily picked up the wine glass and took a sip. But just such a bite miraculously caused their frenzied chewing movements to slowly stop. What's wrong? Su Qian's cheeks were bulging, and there was still a mouthful of greasy food that he had not swallowed. At this moment, he was completely awake and was extremely shocked by his gaffe. The others also woke up one after another after drinking the red wine. The expressions on everyone's faces were exactly the same, inevitably at a loss. Sui Jing shook his head, not intending to tell them the truth at this time. Not only because he didn't want to waste words, but also to avoid alerting the enemy and causing any unpredictable accidents. Who knows? You must be too hungry. The others are not fools. After what happened just now, and looking at the group of men closely monitoring their actions, no matter how slow they are, they can vaguely understand something. Dong, the sound of the pendulum being struck was particularly loud, echoing in the still empty room. After the bell rang, the children immediately put down the tableware in their hands. Even if some of them looked a little reluctant to leave, they still sat in their seats. And those sturdy men who had been waiting for a long time finally waited for the opportunity and began to orderly remove the remaining food, drinks and tableware from the table one by one. Sui Jing suddenly understood that there was a time limit for dining here. Chapter 252 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Immediately afterwards, everyone at the table was cleared away and left. In addition, the outdoor skylight was gradually getting darker. Everyone wanted to go back to the room first, without finding out the details of the dungeon. They all decided not to do it for the time being, ready to stay in the lobby. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaoguo were very obedient and followed Sui Jing back to the room step by step. Xiaomi. After Sui Jing finished washing, he called Qi Xiaomi, who was about to climb onto his bed. Sister? Qi Xiaomi stopped and walked towards Sui Jing in confusion. What's wrong? You and I still haven't finished talking. Qi Xiaomi told her just now that he had secretly seen other people dining before, and the look on her face was probably not simple. The conversation was interrupted by the group of strong men serving the food. But Sui Jing did not intend to let the matter go by just like that. What did you say you accidentally saw? At this moment, Qi Xiaomi may have felt that what she said was inappropriate, so she became hesitant. But Sui Jing didn't mind helping her speak out at all. Qi Xiaomi looked back as if asking for Qi Xiaoguo's opinion. Seeing that the latter had no intention of stopping her, the word she wanted to say choked in her throat, and she finally chose to tell Sui Jing. Sui Jing raised his eyes and waved to Qi Xiaoguo, indicating that he could sit over as well. We all know that there are rules in the orphanage, and one of them explicitly prohibits anyone from stepping out of their room after dinner. Sui Jing blinked. It seemed that the teacher named Zhang had not explained this to them. If Qi Xiaomi hadn't said it, she wouldn't have known there was such a rule. But one night, I was lying in bed sleeping, and I was suddenly woken up by a nightmare. Then I felt that I didn't eat enough at night, and my stomach was a little empty. So I shook Xiaoguo awake and prepared to go to the kitchen together, find some leftovers from dinner. Qi Xiaomi recalled the plot without much effort, remembering even the smallest details. It was enough to show how shocking the impact of what she saw at that time was on her memory. The two of us sneaked towards the kitchen. However, before we reached the kitchen, we heard a loud collision in the front hall. Just recalling it, Qi Xiaomi unexpectedly broke out in a thin cold sweat on his forehead. What neither of us expected was that there would be someone still in the kitchen so late. But neither of us guessed what the sound was at first, and didn't think much about it. We just felt that if others discovered that we sneaked out of the room in the middle of the night, we would definitely be punished. Xiao the child doesn't know what the consequences of breaking the rules will be. She is just worried that she will be punished by adults. Xiaoguo told me to forget it and go back first. If you're hungry, just endure it and wait until dawn. It's best not to take risks for the time being. After listening to her words, Sui Jing glanced at Qi Xiaoguo, who was sitting at his feet, and saw him nodding his head in agreement. I didn't agree at the time. I've been here since I came here, and I felt that even if I was really discovered, nothing would happen. The teachers and aunts usually take good care of me, and they probably wouldn't really blame me for such a small thing. So Qi Xiaomi rejected Qi Xiaoguo's proposal and insisted on heading towards the kitchen. Qi Xiaoguo couldn't persuade Qi Xiaomi, even if he was a little flustered. He couldn't really let Qi Xiaomi go alone, still choosing to follow quietly. But I never expected the huge noise I heard. You know the sound of the machete, chopping board and bones colliding when chopping meat. Qi Xiaomi looked at Sui Jing with fear in his eyes. Sui Jing narrowed his eyes. If he was chopping meat seriously, he wouldn't be able to frighten this little bean into such a state. Even now, he still has lingering fears when he mentions it. Then do you know the man you saw in the kitchen? Sui Jing asked. Well, Qi Xiaomi frowned and thought for a while, then shook his head weakly. No, I've never seen him. Sui Jing turned to look at Qi Xiaoguo, who also shook his head silently to express his reply. Although the man's back was turned to them, they could only see a little bit of the man's profile. But even if they saw that little bit, they were sure that they didn't know that person. At least they hadn't seen him before. Even if he is wearing the work uniform of an employee of the welfare home. Sui Jing fell silent. Although she wanted to believe that the two children were not lying, she couldn't be sure for a while whether they really didn't know each other. Children at this age don't have very good memories. If you don't get along with people often, it's normal for you to forget about them after meeting them a few times. Then what did you see? He is. Qi Xiaomi swallowed hard, glanced in the direction of the door, and lowered his voice and said he used a machete to chop bones on the chopping board. But they were not bones of ordinary animals. Yes. Qi Xiaomi wrung his fingers hard, but couldn't say the next words. However, that's all. Sui Jing is not the kind of person who can't turn around. When she said this, it was already self-evident what the rest of the content was. I was so frightened that I couldn't speak. She and Qi Xiaoguo both hid outside the door. She grabbed the door frame with both hands, and her legs were nailed to the ground as if they were filled with lead. I can't move any further. Then I suddenly heard the sound of many people talking. Xiaoguo was the first to react, pulling me and running away in a hurry. I think about it later. Fortunately, Xiaobo reacted quickly. Otherwise we would have been caught. When I passed the corner of the stairs, the group of people had just entered the restaurant from outside. I vaguely saw a lot of people in that group of people. Familiar people. No wonder she answered so decisively today when she asked everyone else in the Xiaomi Welfare Institute whether they wanted to eat with them. It turned out that she had discovered something was wrong a long time ago. Okay. Sui Jing narrowed her eyes slightly, with an undercurrent of emotion hidden in her eyes. She reached out and patted the back of Qi Xiaomi's head soothingly. It's all over. Don't think about it anymore. Just don't go out in the middle of the night from now on. Sui Jing's deep eyes glanced at the two children. Knowing so much and telling her this information was enough. These two children were definitely not just ordinary NPCs. They must have some important identity. By the way, did anyone really live in those buildings at the back? Sui Jing's topic suddenly changed. Then are there still people living there now? After all, she still felt strange. And most likely what Teacher Zhang said was not believable. I can't stand it anymore. Qi Xiaobo has learned to answer quickly. There used to be many brothers and sisters living there. But no one has lived there for a long time now. They must be full of spiders. In fact, he was exaggerating. Although no one had lived in those apartments for a while. But it is not full of spiders. And the cobwebs are still pretty much there. Is that so? Sui Jing deliberately lengthened his voice. It turns out I haven't stayed here for a long time. Did those brothers and sisters live alone before? Or did they live with someone like you? Brother and sister. Qi Xiaomi didn't know much about these things and looked at Qi Xiaobo with her cheeks puffed up. Some people will live by themselves. And some people will live with someone. Qi Xiaobo gave an expected answer. Hey, don't you want to listen to a story today? Sui Jing suddenly raised the topic. You guys go to bed first. And I'll tell you a story. Okay. The two children put the worrying things aside in the blink of an eye. Qi Xiaomi quickly climbed onto his bed and covered himself with quilt. Qi Xiaomi also tucked the corner of the quilt vigorously. And then looked at Sui Jing eagerly, waiting for her to tell a story. Sui Jing walked from his bed to the dark brown leather single sofa near their bed and sat down on the only single dark brown leather sofa in the room. Then he took out an A4 paper from his pocket. He couldn't help seeing their little actions from the corner of his eye. He chuckled and lowered his voice slightly. It's true that she can't tell fairy tales, but she can still pick them up easily. A long time ago, in an ancient country, there was a handsome monk. His name was... The indifferent but gentle voice sounded like a cold jade ring slowly, which gradually aroused some of their sleepiness. Sui Jing didn't finish speaking. He raised his eyes and glanced in the direction of the door, and a clear smile flashed across his lips. Chapter 253 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Hoo ho ho. Sui Jing noticed that the two children fell asleep one after another, and then stopped breathing steadily. She folded the A4 paper in her hand a few times, and placed it on the coffee table next to the sofa. She pressed it down with a glass. There was not much text on the paper. Only a few lines. She read it in a few dozen seconds. She didn't ask just now what time Qi Xiaomi mentioned about midnight. It's not that she didn't think of this problem. It's just... Sui Jing's eyes couldn't help but wander to the door. His eyebrows lowered, as if he was thinking about something important. There may always be more interesting things happening in the quiet night. Suddenly, the corners of Sui Jing's lips curled up slightly. Isn't this just about finding fun? I don't know how much the person hiding outside the door heard. However, according to Sui Jing's judgment, he probably didn't hear all of their conversation. The moment Sui Jing noticed someone outside the door, she immediately changed the topic. Therefore, I probably only heard the second half of their conversation. That is, she asked Qi Xiaobo if anyone had lived in the house behind. If you overhear the first half and don't finish it, the information you get will be incomplete. However, compared to other things, Sui Jing now wanted to know more about who had the courage to hide at her door and eavesdrop during this time. Are you afraid that you won't be discovered? How confident do you feel that you are hiding perfectly? And even if he heard it, it wouldn't matter. If a person wants to die, he can't stop him. The corner of Sui Jing's eyes fell lightly on the paper pressed by the glass. She just got this one from the nurse, who brought them in. It's actually nothing special. The identity information of their group was clearly recorded above. Perhaps because Sui Jing's total points were so high, her name was naturally ranked first. The paper is marked with their photo, name, serial number, and some other basic information. It's just a little different from other players. Sui Jing's number column is empty. She had seen Chi Yun's ID card before, and there was a big Q-shaped symbol printed in the number column. Therefore, she can boldly speculate that the number she calls is her own inspector ranking J. It's just that her current status has not been restored to that of an inspector. So it would look weird to write the original sort number on it. But it would be even more inappropriate to renumber her. So I just had to sit there empty. People who don't know may mistakenly think there is a bug. But usually no one cares or notices this little thing. Not everyone has the ability like Sui Jing to easily get the list of NPCs without being discovered. Naturally, she didn't tell anyone when she got this form. One is because there is no need. After all, everyone except her knows each other. The second is because she doesn't trust them. There aren't that many reasons. It's just pure distrust so far. That's all. What's even weirder is that one of their names seems to be missing from this list. Sui Jing was thinking about whether he should find time to go to the free apartments in the back tomorrow to conduct an on-site inspection. If you really want to go, you have to find a reasonable reason. And it's best to avoid these two children, lest they get confused and complain. Although they seem to have a good relationship with Sui Jing now, they could not prevent them from suddenly changing their minds. If that were the case, it would be a little more troublesome. As for the other things in this apartment, she believed that someone would check it out for her. I guess it shouldn't take long. Sui Jing walked to the door and confirmed that the door was locked from the inside. A little relieved and ready to go to bed. But at this moment, she frowned suddenly. She suddenly felt a burning dull pain in her throat, as if she had swallowed several sharp blades alive. Sui Jing pinched his neck with his palms, walked quickly to the suitcase, squatted down and took out a bottle of drinking water. She quickly opened the cap of the bottle and drank half of the bottle of water. Only then did she feel that the burning sensation seemed to have eased a bit and was not as strong as before. The cold sweat still oozing out on his forehead told Sui Jing that the pain just now was not an illusion. Sui Jing took a deep breath, but his throat still hadn't calmed down yet. She stood up and sat on the bed, holding on to the edge of the bed. If there was a mirror in front of her now, she would definitely be able to see her extremely pale face. Sui Jing's fingers holding the water bottle suddenly tightened, and the emerald green veins on the back of his hand emerged due to excessive force, and the plastic bottle immediately made a noisy crunch. The sound of the plastic bottle was so abrupt in the quiet room that even the two children, who had fallen asleep early, turned over impatiently. But fortunately, they were not woken up. Sui Jing believed that he would not have such strange symptoms for no reason. She knew full well that she must have been accidentally tricked at some point. But when? She thought about it. Since she arrived at the orphanage, she basically had no time to do anything. And she probably didn't break any taboos that she shouldn't have. The only thing I did was drink a little red wine during dinner tonight. After thinking about it, only the glass of red wine seemed suspicious. She said that the setting of this game is not that simple. It turns out there is such a layer. Although red wine can relieve the temptation of food in a short period of time, its effect will take effect after a period of time, making people feel like they have swallowed a razor blade in their throat, making life worse than death. At the end of the day, you either have to eat the questionable food or you have to endure extraordinary pain. But he might even be hurt to death. Ding ding, the doorbell of Sui Jing's room rang quickly. Sui Jing sat there and did not move immediately. She first glanced in the direction of the two children, and then looked at the door. To be honest, personally, she really didn't want to open the door at this time. But if she really doesn't open the door, I'm afraid. Ding ding, before Sui Jing could think about it, the doorbell rang quickly again. Sui Jing sighed, wiped the cold sweat on his forehead with paper, then walked to the door in a few steps and opened the door a crack. Sui Jing frowned slightly, deliberately flattening the corners of his mouth, and silently looked at the person standing outside the door, his eyes cold and indifferent, with a clear sense of impatience and intimidation. She stared at him, as if waiting for him to speak first. This reaction seems to be very normal. Anyone who is woken up in the middle of the night will not look good. Sister Sui Jing, I'm sorry to bother you so late. The person coming was neither Su Ying nor Su Chen. Sui Jing stared at his face and compared him with the information written on the A4 paper. He is Cheng Mingyun. It's really interesting that he calls her sister even though he seems to be older than her. But Sui Jing doesn't mind. Is something wrong? After getting along for a short time, he already knew that Sui Jing's expression was always cold. And now, he was even more cold as he stood here with few words. In addition, his face looked strangely pale and sickly compared to that at dinner, subconsciously making people think that something had happened in a short period of time. Excuse me. Do you have extra drinking water here? Chung Mingyun asked anxiously. Someone on our side had a problem. But our drinking water has been used up. We didn't find anything to drink in the room. We're not sure if the tap water in the room is drinkable. So we have to come over and ask you. Of course Sui Jing could refuse him. But surprisingly she didn't. He didn't say why he came here to seek drinking water. And Sui Jing didn't ask much. She didn't even look at him. She just said, "Wait." Then she left him at the door, and turned around to walk into the room. After a while, he brought out a bottle of drinking water, and handed it to him. There's only one bottle left. The implication is that there won't be any more. So don't ask her for water next time. Thank you, Sister Sui Jing. Chung Mingyun happily took the water bottle and thanked her. Yeah. Sui Jing nodded, pretending to be sleepy and lazy, and about to close the door. Huh? Just when the door was about to close, Chung Mingyun quickly reached out to block it, seeing that his hand was about to be pressed by the door panel. Is there anything else? Sui Jing held the door frame with one hand, although she wanted to suppress it for a moment. The game was not on track yet, and she didn't know what they wanted to do yet. So she had to endure it for the time being. Sister Sui Jing, don't you turn off the lights when you sleep? Chung Mingyun asked, with an uncomfortable smile on his face. Sui Jing suddenly raised his eyes, and stared into Chung Mingyun's eyes. The tired laziness on his face suddenly disappeared, and the coldness in his eyes suddenly made Chung Mingyun feel a chill in his heart. His face still looked a little sickly and pale, but the breathless aura was pressing down on him like a substance. Oops. I seem to have accidentally offended the wrong person this time. Chung Mingyun wanted to leave, but found that his legs seemed to be frozen in place, unable to move. Humph. Unexpectedly, Sui Jing stared at his expression in silence for a while, then suddenly sneered, lightly opening his thin red lips. And every word he spoke seemed to be stained with ice. You seem to be taking too much care. Just a suggestion. Don't do too much sometimes. Chapter 254 Sunshine Welfare Institute. When Sui Jing said this to Chung Mingyun, most of the clothes that were originally attached to his back were soaked through and stuck to his back. He swallowed hard and moved the soles of his feet back against her cold gaze. Half step. Chung Mingyun's mind was running wildly. He didn't know if Sui Jing would do anything to him. Although he thinks he is a grown man after all, he may not be at a disadvantage if he really takes action. However, the aura Sui Jing exuded was indeed a bit scary for no reason. So he thought it would be better to leave first, and not cause trouble for the time being. Otherwise, I won't be able to explain it later. So he lowered his eyebrows and said in a quiet voice, I know. I promise not to meddle in other people's business next time. Then let's go. I won't send you off. After Sui Jing finished speaking, he closed the door with a click, because Chung Mingyun was too close to the door. The door panel almost hit the bridge of his nose. Chung Mingyun breathed a sigh of relief. His legs were still a little weak, but he didn't stay there for a moment. He hurried back to his room with a bottle of water Sui Jing gave him in his hand. He was afraid that if he stayed for a second longer, he would kneel on the ground. Sui Jing closed the door and walked straight to the bed, hoping that no other accidents would happen tonight. She currently has no superfluous feelings for the other people in this copy. Whether they live or die really has no effect on her. Just don't get in her way. In fact, it can be seen that everyone in this dungeon is not a fuel-efficient lamp. They are all holding back a lot of bad water, and don't know when to pour it out. A large part of the reason why she said that just now was to intimidate Chung Mingyun. But ultimately, she just wanted to give him a slight warning. If you meddle in your own business, you will die quickly and miserably. No matter how hard she said it. She didn't know if it was him who was eavesdropping at the door. She had no evidence. The reason he came over and asked her for water was probably because other people who drank red wine had the same symptoms as her. It was just that there was really no water, or she was trying to find out something for some other reason. But it was hard to say. Sui Jing was lying on the bed without turning off the lights. If there is any place that needs light in the middle of the night, you don't have to look for fire anymore. Anyway, the light was dim and not too dazzling. With a soft orange light, you might be able to sleep more peacefully. Tick tick tick. Sui Jing was woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of dripping water coming from nowhere. But it was really strange. She remembered checking the bathroom faucet before going to bed, just in case. She even turned off the water valve. She was very aware of her bad habits. If she was woken up in the middle of the night, it would be difficult to continue sleeping. So where did this sound of dripping water come from? Kitchen? Regardless of the fact that the kitchen is very far away from where they live, If the faucet in the kitchen is really not turned on tightly, no matter how good her hearing is, she will definitely not be able to hear it from such a long distance. Moreover, she had never heard this sound before she fell asleep. It couldn't be that someone really ran to the kitchen in the middle of the night. That was the sound coming from next door or upstairs. There are people living next door. As for who lives there, if I remember correctly, they should be suing Suchin and the others. There seems to be a girl named UK and a boy named Wang Yu on the other side. As for the upstairs, no one lives there. At least not players like them. It is unknown whether any of the welfare home staff live upstairs. Sui Jing blinked but made no movement. Not even turning over. She stared at the ceiling with her eyes open. Fortunately, she didn't turn off the light. She was staring at the shadow cast on the ceiling in a daze. Despite her serious look, she was actually counting the stars silently in her heart. I don't know how much time passed, but Sui Jing sighed leisurely when he heard the sound of dripping water that hadn't stopped yet. He raised his wrist outside the quilt and glanced at it with half-closed eyes. It's 5:40. Half an hour has passed. She was still not sleepy at all, and was even becoming more and more awake. It's over. I can't sleep at all now. But I really don't want to move. It's still early before dawn. No matter how fast it is, it will still be more than an hour. Even though the sound of dripping water was really disturbing. She didn't want to go find out what was going on when it was still dark outside. There was no need. Right? Comfort is more important. She just thought about it. Even if she wanted to die, there was no need to work so hard. It was the most comfortable way to show off properly. If she had to commit suicide, it would be much easier for her to wait for other strange things to come to her door than to actively look for them. But the only problem now is that this ticking sound is really annoying. But those two little kids didn't hear anything at all, and fell into a deep sleep. Sui Jing simply closed his eyes to rest, which was more comfortable than keeping his eyes open. Just when Sui Jing was finally able to fall asleep to the sound of dripping water, she felt the bright skylight filtering in from the window. It's daybreak. After a while, the familiar sound of a pendulum clock striking was heard. The shock made Sui Jing's head buzz. She was too lazy to pay attention to the sound of the bell at the moment. She is not a person who gets out of bed in a bad mood. But even if she hasn't had a good night's sleep, she won't have a particularly kind expression. Sui Jing frowned, lifted the quilt, sat up, and rubbed his forehead speechlessly. Good morning, sister. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaobo also sat up and said low to Sui Jing drowsily while rubbing their eyes. Good morning. Sui Jing replied expressionlessly, and walked into the bathroom to wash up. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaobo were keenly aware that something was wrong. Why is there an inexplicable air of restraint and depression surrounding my sister? And compared with yesterday, my sister this morning had a passive and impatient attitude that said don't bother me, do whatever you want, don't care, etc. all over her face. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaobo looked at each other, both confused. However, due to time constraints, the two of them climbed out of bed neatly and started to prepare for washing. Sui Jing waited for the two children to finish washing, then opened the door and went out. Just then, I bumped into Suing and others walking from the other side of the corridor. Seeing that they all had ugly looks on their faces, they must have had a hard time last night. Her low gaze passed over everyone and landed firmly on Cheng Mingyun. Just a fleeting glance scared him so much that he almost sprained his feet. Sui Jing looked away indifferently, holding a little bean in one hand and walking downstairs. According to Xiao Doubting, they get up early to have breakfast every day, which is a rigid rule of the orphanage. But something seemed to have happened today. Sui Jing and others heard the noisy sound of many people talking before they even arrived at the restaurant. When she got closer, she realized that the passage leading from the dining room to the kitchen was almost full of people. This is the first time she has seen so many people here. What happened? Suchin asked from behind. Obviously, he also saw this grand occasion. I don't know. Sui Jing's intuition was that something was not good. She placed the two children in their seats before she stepped forward, when she saw clearly a person lying bloody on the floor surrounded by everyone. Her pupils shrank suddenly. She took a step back, turned to the others and said, "It's a person." She recognized the man through his clothes and the remaining skin and facial features of the man, which must be Wang Yu who lived next door to her. But she didn't say that they didn't introduce themselves yesterday. Others may know Sui Jing, but Sui Jing should not know anyone else except Suing and Suchin. When Suchin heard this, he hurried forward. After a while, he tremblingly returned to his original position. With a lump in his throat, he said to Suing. It's Wang Yu. He looked very sad. But to his surprise, Suing showed no expression and even smiled secretly. How could this happen? She said, her tone regretful and sad. Weren't you fine last night? No one answered her. And it was extremely quiet for a while. Whether you know the truth or you are confused. Everyone looked at me and I looked at you. And everyone was speechless. The corners of Sui Jing's mouth twitched, and he remained silent as always. Death and injury are normal in a game. You never know whether the living person standing in front of you will stop breathing in the next second. Therefore, other people did not show very sad emotions. At most, they were a little afraid. However, it was fear of their own unknown fate and had nothing to do with others. Look, people are like this. Selfish, boring, and a little cowardly. However, Wang Yu would die in this place, which most likely triggered some taboo condition in this dungeon. For example, you can't step out of the room after dinner. Otherwise, even if he really died for no reason, he wouldn't have died in this place. Woof woof, a deafening bark broke the strange atmosphere at that time. Everyone saw the nurse, who brought them in yesterday, running in with a pure black fur Tibetan Mastiff, with a ferocious face that was as big as a small scooter. Seeing the extremely ferocious vicious dog running in their direction, several children were almost frightened to tears. Sui Jing, however, stood still, his long and thick eyelashes lightly lowered, his handsome eyebrows darkening, and the hand holding the handle of the knife and hanging by his side tightened unconsciously. Chapter 255, Sunshine Welfare Institute. There was no obvious change in Sui Jing's expression or movements. If he didn't pay attention to her all the time, it would be no different than usual. However, Suing had been watching her every move closely since he came downstairs. Now he naturally noticed that something was wrong with Sui Jing from the moment he saw the exaggerated Tibetan Mastiff. Could it be that he is afraid of dogs? It's no wonder that Su Ying's first reaction was that Sui Jing was afraid of dogs. No matter how others saw Sui Jing slowly tightening her slender fingers, and even her fingertips gradually turning white, they would think she was afraid. But if you look more carefully, you will find that her expression is not completely scared. If you look deeper into her eyes, you can still catch a hint of confusion. In short, this reaction is very strange. For some reason, Suing actually found it exciting that someone like Sui Jing, who looked cold and heartless on the outside, would be afraid of something. There is a place inside that is stirring. Even so, Suing still concealed a restlessness in her heart, walked up to Sui Jing with a trace of temptation and questions, and asked in a low voice, "Are you afraid of dogs?" She was a bit clever. Perhaps because she was afraid of upsetting Sui Jing with her sudden question. So she didn't directly reveal Sui Jing's mental activities, as if she just asked a casual gossip. Sui Jing tilted his head and lowered his eyelids. A thin layer of blurry vision lingered between Su Ying's head and face for a few seconds before retracting. There was no immediate answer to her question. To be honest, an awkward atmosphere like this is really a bit fatal. Fortunately, such a scene itself was also expected by Suing. They didn't know each other very well, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say they were strangers. Sui Jing had no reason to tell her everything about him. To tell you the truth, I'm also quite afraid of dogs. Just when Suing smiled calmly and was about to resolve the suffocating atmosphere, he clearly heard a faint reply coming from his ear. Huh? Suing slightly opened her eyes in surprise. If Sui Jing hadn't turned his head to meet her gaze again, with a serious look in those beautiful eyes, without any intention of joking, she would have suspected that she had heard it wrong. Sui Jing received Su Ying's blank gaze and mistakenly thought that she had not heard her answer. Her masseter muscles trembled imperceptibly, then tightened and then quickly relaxed. And she used her slightly cool voice again. Repeated, "I do have some fear of big dogs." Su Ying was even more surprised now, and felt inexplicably flattered. Maybe this description was a bit exaggerated, but she never thought that Sui Jing would actually repeat it to her alone. Why? Su Ying couldn't help blurting out. The second after the words came out of his mouth, he immediately regretted his words. I wish I could bite my tongue off. What does it have to do with him? He just doesn't care. She quietly raised her head and glanced at Sui Jing in embarrassment. Only her smooth and delicate profile was in her eyes, and she suddenly felt nervous and wanted to sneeze. Sure enough, Sui Jing had no intention of continuing to answer her. Her eyes fell directly on the Tibetan Mastiff that was brought in, and a light coolness was exuding all over her body. It's not intimidating, but it only adds a vague sense of distance. The corners of his mouth and eyelids were straightened, and he didn't know whether he really didn't hear her question or whether he did and pretended not to. Sui Jingshi just answered Su Ying's question out of basic etiquette and did not let her words fall to the ground easily. What's more, this itself is not a taboo that cannot be mentioned. But if we ask further, they cannot continue the conversation based on their existing relationship. It's not Sui Jing's character to tell too much to someone who doesn't know the details yet. But her fear of dogs was not a dirty secret after all. In crowded places, intrigues are inevitable most of the time, even for an ordinary wealthy family. Once the number of people in the family increases, there is a high probability that the family will not have a long-term peaceful life. The more a person gets, the more he wants, and the more things he wants to grab. Once you don't get it but others get it, the resentment and injustice in your heart will take root and sprout like weeds, and the wildfire will never burn it out. This is true for other families, not to mention the long-standing aristocratic family that Sui Jing belongs to. To put it most intuitively, all kinds of uncles, aunts in the family, and everyone in the direct and collateral line are eyeing the position of the head of the family. When my grandfather was still here, these relatives were still somewhat restrained, and they didn't dare to show it openly even if they made any small moves. Since the death of his grandfather, various struggles for power have emerged one after another, even if her father is the destined head of the family after her grandfather. Until the last moment, who can be sure who will eventually fall as the head of the family? Sui Jing has experienced no less than 10 kidnappings, large and small, since she was a child, and she still has memories of them, either by her own family or by other families or groups. But Sui Jing was still a real child when he first experienced kidnapping. Sui Jing was only 5 years old at that time, and Sui's father had not yet married Aunt Wei. They couldn't do anything with Sui's father, so they turned their attention to Sui Jing, even if it is very despicable to attack the juniors. As long as they can get the position of the head of the family in the end, who will care about what methods they have used? Sui Jing vaguely remembered that what he saw when he opened his eyes, when he was kidnapped, was that he was abandoned in an abandoned factory. Her hands and feet were tied up, and it was impossible for her to break free at that time. Later, when she grew older, she thought that it would be really difficult for her kidnapper to find such a factory in this day and age. It took a lot of thought and planning for a long time. When she woke up, no one was watching her in the factory. She tried to stand up and slowly moved to the door step by step. Through the small crack in the door, she could see several circles of black Tibetan Mastiffs surrounding the warehouse. Almost all of the bodyguards sent to protect her were bitten by Tibetan Mastiffs. There were pieces of tattered clothes scattered on the ground, and bright red pools of dazzling blood were visible to the naked eye on the dark soil. But there was no trace of those who kidnapped her. She knew she couldn't get out. But if someone is not called to find her in time, even if the Tibetan Mastiffs cannot bite her, she may not be able to survive successfully. If her kidnapper doesn't get what he wants, Sui Jing's fate can be imagined. Hey, our Miss Sui is awake. Sui Jing's eyes narrowed because he was not used to the strong light, and a tall figure was already standing in front of him. But she couldn't see his face in the memory. Sui Jing didn't know how much of his memory had been erased. According to Qi Yun's original statement, it had been erased from college to after entering the system. However, forcibly erasing memory itself was unnatural. It had been earlier. It is understandable that I have forgotten some of my fragmentary memories. Ask her not to dwell too much on the past, as long as it doesn't affect her normal life. But since then, she has developed a fear of large dogs, no matter how cute they look. She later thought that she didn't want to remember that incident and was afraid of large dogs. In addition to the psychological shadow caused by seeing bloody scenes when she was a child, she might be more disgusted with her own powerlessness. The feeling of powerlessness of not being able to do anything is worse than having your heart eaten by ants. Su Ying was very close to her, and she could see Sui Jing's eyes when she raised her eyes. There was always something in Sui Jing's eyes that ordinary people couldn't understand. But at this moment, there was a sudden feeling of loneliness that wasn't too strong. Are you okay? Su Ying asked. Huh? Sui Jing responded without knowing why, without turning his head to look at her. But without blinking, he saw the Tibetan Mastiff being brought to the corpse, and then chewing up the bloody corpse lying on the ground together with its bones and flesh. In the end, even the blood on the ground was licked clean, and no one around him reacted, as if nothing had happened. I'm fine. Sui Jing shook his head, his face calm. It's you. Isn't he your partner? Aren't you sad? Chapter 256 Sunshine Welfare Institute. If you ask that, then I should really show a little bit of sadness, right? That's what Su Ying said. But Sui Jing really couldn't find a trace of sadness on her face. Just kidding. But I really don't feel it. Not only was there no trace of sadness, Su Ying's curved eyelids outlined a full smile. And she pretended to be serious and said, besides, everyone in the game should know that they have no choice in their own lives. Right. People may die for various reasons at any time. Think about it. The first thing you think about when you open your eyes every day is what should you do on the new day to survive in this evil environment. Isn't it hard to live like this? Sui Jing waited for her to finish speaking and was silent for a few seconds before asking, what? Su Ying was interrupted. The words in his mind were blocked before he could say them out. He didn't understand the meaning of Sui Jing's words. It's a life that is worse than death. Isn't it hard to endure a life when life is worse than death if you are not careful? Sui Jing repeated his words, still calm and calm. Yes. Su Ying was stunned and breathed heavily, pouring out all the resentment he had held in his heart. Inexplicably, I felt a little decadent. How could it not be difficult? Before this, I had never had such a painful experience of risking my life just to survive. So, as long as I can survive, that's fine. Does it seem like it's not that important if other people can survive? Su Ying paused for a moment, then changed the subject before Sui Jing spoke again. As far as the most direct relationship between our group of people is concerned, one you can indeed be said to be our companion, but also just a companion. Personally, I have never been sad about the death of others, because I have not even found the right death for myself. Besides, a partner is just a partner after all. They are just people who have walked a certain journey together. They are just acquaintances, but not necessarily familiar with each other. If you die, just die. Is it possible that you really have to mourn and mourn for a dead person? So, as long as I can survive, it will be fine. What does others have to do with me? Su Ying raised the corner of her mouth and looked at Sui Jing. You don't seem to be the kind of person who would be sentimental and care about the lives and deaths of others. Right? Su Ying turned his face back with a smile, calmly looked at the chaotic and disorderly scene in front of him, and expressed his few emotions. Maybe we are probably the same kind of person. How much blood is there on your hands? Seriously? Have you ever killed anyone? Su Ying's eyes sparkled with curiosity. After being tortured in the game for so long, she has long since lost her heart. The death of others has long been a common occurrence for her. Sui Jing obviously didn't want to answer the meaningless question she asked, and looked at the activities going on in the room with indifferent eyes. Apart from them, all the extra people in the room were cleared out one by one. The chaotic scene gradually returned to calm. Other players and children were once again invited to sit on the chairs around the dining table. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaoduo sat in their own chairs as soon as they arrived. There was nothing that needed special care at this time. Then, the group of brawny chefs from last night walked out in a neat row again, each holding a bowl of good-looking rice porridge and some snacks placed in front of each seat. Humph. Sui Jing released his curled fingers, let out a suppressed snort in his throat, turned around and walked towards the dining table. When he passed Su Ying sideways, he glanced at her. No comment on Su Ying's rhetorical remarks just now. The beautiful lips touched up and down, and a few words came out. I'm not the same person as you. It was not the case before. It is not the case now. And it will never be the case in the future. She is never sentimental, but she may not care about other people's lives and deaths. If it was her partner, she would probably be very mindful. After saying that, he didn't care about Su Ying's reaction. Sui Jing walked to his seat where he sat yesterday. He lowered his eyes and noticed that Qi Xiaomi was secretly looking at him, and stretched out his hand to symbolically rub her hair. From the corner of her eye, she saw that after she sat down, Su Ying also sat down opposite her. Qi Xiaomi silently looked away after being touched on the head, and concentrated on scooping up the rice porridge in his bowl. Perhaps due to the painful experience last night, everyone present was staring at the rice porridge and snacks in their bowls in silence, not daring to make any move. Sui Jing didn't care about other people's actions. Like other children, he took a porcelain spoon and scooped up the gruel one by one and put it into his mouth. Sister Sui Jing. Su Chen didn't know what Sui Jing said to her sister, so she naturally didn't feel the strange atmosphere permeating the dining table. He subconsciously wanted to remind Sui Jing. In fact, most of this weird atmosphere came from Su Ying unilaterally. After all, Sui Jing really didn't show any extra attitude. Sui Jing put down the spoon calmly and swallowed the food in his mouth completely before saying slowly, "It's okay." All the same, her words were quite confusing. But everyone present instantly understood the hidden meaning in her words. Indeed, the meal they had this morning was exactly the same as what these children had. It was different from last night, and there was no difference in treatment. In this case, it should be edible. Right? And they didn't have any particularly unusual reactions today. And they didn't laugh at the bowl of rice. Maybe they all figured it out. So everyone no longer hesitated, picked up their spoons, and started eating. A bowl of hot food still tastes much better than the fast food they brought themselves. When they had just taken 2 bites, Sui Jing had already finished and put down the utensils. She gracefully picked up the napkin and wiped the soup stains from the corner of her mouth, waiting for the 2 children to finish. Then again, she had just forgotten to tell them what the meat slices they devoured last night were. When she mentioned it now, she always felt that the timing was not right. So she simply stopped talking about it. Anyway, there is a high probability that I won't eat it a second time. It doesn't seem to have any impact if I don't tell you. Although she wanted to tell them at first. Subconsciously she wanted to discuss them. But now that she thought about it, she was still naive. Sister, we've finished eating too. Qi Xiaomi naturally took Sui Jing's hand and shook it after wiping her mouth. Then let's leave first, Sui Jing said, taking the lead to hug Qi Xiaomi down, who was closer to her. Just as she was about to hug Qi Xiaogua, she saw the little boy jumping down on his own. Boom! After a crisp sound, Sui Jing looked up and found that Su Ying's spoon fell to the hard ground and was immediately smashed into pieces. The 2 people's eyes met in the air, and the invisible smoke was about to erupt. Sui Jing was the first to look away, with the corners of his lips slightly hooked, and whether accidentally or intentionally, he said to the strong man standing behind him, "Hurry up and help her change his spoon. She hasn't finished it yet." She should be lucky that this dungeon didn't have any rules against damaging items. Otherwise her spoon would have been dead if she dropped it. After saying that, she raised her eyelids and took another deep look at Su Ying, then walked away. However, Su Ying's eyes were like poisonous snakes that were glued to Sui Jing's hand holding Qi Xiaomi. It was sticky and slippery, enough to give people goosebumps. Chapter 257 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing took the 2 children back to the room and asked them, "Do you want to play games?" "What game?" The 2 children were unprepared and danced happily when they heard that Sui Jing wanted to play a game with them. Sui Jing pretended to think about it and wrinkled his eyebrows in confusion. How about hide and seek?" Okay. Qi Xiaomi jumped up and down around Sui Jing happily, muttering, "Xiaomi likes my sister the most." In the past, no one was willing to take the initiative to play games with them. Even if they asked to play with them, those people were hesitant. It was obvious at a glance that they were unwilling. My sister also likes Xiaomi very much. That's weird. Sui Jing curled his lips and touched the top of Qi Xiaomi's hair. But there was no loose smile in his eyes. Although these 2 children are not annoying, I can't say I like them either. Besides, it would be too hypocritical to say that you like the NPC. While Sui Jing was thinking this, he felt his clothes being gently tugged. She looked down and saw that it was Qi Xiaogua who tugged at the hem of her clothes. "I also like my sister the most," Qi Xiaogua said shyly, blinking his eyes and looking at Sui Jing expectantly. After saying this, he smiled sheepishly, with a small pear dimple appearing at the corner of his mouth. Extremely well behaved. Sui Jing felt at a loss for the first time. What does he want to do? What should I say now? Even though Sui Jing was complaining in his heart, he still bent his eyes at Qi Xiaogua and patted the back of his head. "Sister like Xiaogua too?" "Yeah." Qi Xiaogua became even more shy after Sui Jing finished speaking. Her head buried low, but her ears were completely red with embarrassment. Compared to Qi Xiaogua, Qi Xiaomi was much more cheerful and generous. Her eyes wandered between the 2 of them, and she suddenly pointed at Qi Xiaogua and laughed as if she understood something. "Xiaogua is shy." "Okay. Stop teasing Xiaogua." Sui Jing saw Qi Xiaogua's head buried lower and lower, and wished he could get under the floor and speak out to save him. "Then let's start now. Shall we?" "Okay," the 2 said in unison. "Who do you think is better to come to whom?" Sui Jing did not make a decision alone, but asked them both for their opinions first. "My sister and I hid, and Xiaogua came to find us." Qi Xiaomi made the decision without even thinking about it. "Is Xiaogua willing?" Sui Jing looked at Qi Xiaogua, who had a pouting look on his face, and asked, pretending not to notice. "It's impossible for her to come looking for her." Although it's not impossible. But her main purpose for proposing this game was to take advantage of this time to visit the apartment buildings in the back. It might not be so convenient for her to find someone. If the two children were not found, they would definitely run out on their own. Then everyone will know she's missing. But if she is the one hiding, she can coax them a little to look for it longer if they can't find it, without being too anxious. Okay. Qi Shaohua finally nodded in agreement. Although he also wanted to hide with his sister. He was the eldest brother, and did not dare to let Xiaomi come to them alone. After all, Xiaomi was timid, and it would be bad if he was scared. It would be more appropriate for him to come, and let Xiaomi and sister hide. Then you close your eyes, and count 100. And then come to us. Qi Xiaomi snatched Sui Jing's words, and told Qi Shaohua, you must count 100. And you must never steal it. Look! Peep. Peeping is a puppy. I know it. Qi Shaohua impatiently interrupted Qi Xiaomi's long talk and urged, you guys hide quickly. I will finish counting 100 in no time. Sister, let's go quickly. Qi Xiaomi took Sui Jing's hand, and rushed out of the door. Qi Xiaomi took Sui Jing to the first floor. There was no one living on the first floor, but there were many vacant rooms. But according to Qi Xiaomi, other people can enter these rooms at will without any restrictions. Qi Xiaomi found a random room, and hid in a cabinet. She also hoped that Sui Jing could hide with her. But he was rejected by Sui Jing. Xiaomi, we are a team. If we hide together, wouldn't we all be found at once? Then we will lose soon. Sui Jing coaxed, so we have to hide separately. So that we won't be found so quickly. Right? As long as one of us is not found. It's not a loss. Right? Yes. Qi Xiaomi nodded, feeling that what Sui Jing said made sense. Then sister, please go to another room. Just hide yourself and don't talk. Okay. After saying that, Sui Jing closed the cabinet door and walked out of the room without waiting for Qi Xiaomi to answer. Okay. Qi Xiaomi responded weakly in the cabinet. But sister, please don't run around. You can only move around in this house. Qi Xiaomi didn't know if Sui Jing heard what she said. When she found that her eyes suddenly turned dark. Sui Jing he has long since disappeared. So she had to huddle quietly in the corner of the cabinet, waiting for Qi Shaohua to find her. Of course Sui Jing heard it, but ignored it. She took advantage of the time to avoid the crowds, who were still eating, and walked around to the apartment building at the back that was currently unoccupied. The apartment buildings were covered with a light layer of dust, as if a breeze would raise smoke and dust all over the sky. The dark red exterior wall of the building has faded, and each wall is covered with thick ivy and unknown long vines. The main door of the apartment building was also locked, with a huge and heavy iron lock hanging on the door handle. The rhizomes and leaves of the plant are tightly wrapped around the edges of the gate. It's like a place where the nameless beast lives in an old fairy tale. Sui Jing stepped forward and stretched out one hand to hold up the iron lock and inspect it, as if searching for the location of the keyhole. After looking for a long time, Sui Jing only found a small square hole similar to a keyhole. However, this small hole may not work with her usual lock-picking method. And even if the lock is opened, the door still cannot be opened. She could see through the narrow crack in the door that there was a lock inside the door. Locking the door. It seems that there are layers of protection. Airtight. TSK. Sui Jing gently put down the iron lock and looked up at the building in front of him. The following buildings seem to be connected to each other. As long as you enter one of them, you can enter other buildings through the corridors inside the building. She moved slowly around the edge of the building closest to her, and found an unclosed glass window on the right side of the building covered with green plants. More importantly, there was probably no glass window inside. Install anti-theft fence. And the height is probably on the second floor, which is not too high. It is not difficult for Sui Jing to climb up. Now that you've decided, go for it. Sui Jing stood under the window and pulled the hanging vine hard to judge whether it was strong and able to bear her weight. Not to mention that there are green plants all over the wall. Even if it is a smooth wall, it is impossible to climb it with bare hands. Fortunately, there are ready-made tools now. Sui Jing didn't know whether it was good luck or not. Chapter 258 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Ta was accompanied by a soft sound, and Sui Jing was seen deftly holding on to the window eaves with one hand and climbing into the apartment from the outside of the half-open window. Sui Jing stood up and realized that the room she was currently in looked very old and had probably been vacant for a long time. Moreover, there was nothing in the room. The wooden floor was covered with dust. Sui Jing would clearly leave a shoe mark every step he took. The apartment building was eerily quiet. If Sui Jing hadn't been inside, It would have been like there wouldn't even be air circulating inside. And because the walls outside the apartment were covered with vines and vegetation, the light inside the apartment was extremely dark. Sui Jing came in a hurry, so she didn't bring a flashlight, so she had to turn on the lighting system on her phone. The apartment was filled with an unknown rancid smell, mixed with the thick smell of dust, which made Sui Jing feel uncomfortable in his respiratory system. Ta! Tap! Tap! Sui Jing had already walked as lightly as possible, but today she was wearing a pair of hard-soled, low-heeled leather boots, which inevitably made a slight sound on the wooden floor, even though this kind of footsteps is nothing at ordinary times. In the extremely empty environment, it seems particularly clear and abrupt. It was like 3D stereo surround sound hovering in Sui Jing's ears. It was too quiet. Sui Jing walked out of the room and walked to the corridor outside. The floor and walls of the corridor are covered with two-tone dark gray and dark red ceramic tiles, which looks depressing and dim, except for the room that Sui Jing just walked out of. Most of the doors of the other rooms on both sides of the corridor were locked with slender iron chains from the outside, as if they were deliberately covering something up. Sui Jing has no intention of going into these locked and forbidden rooms now. She just wants to take a walk around these apartments, get to know the layout of the apartments, and see if she can get any unexpected results. It doesn't matter if there is none. After all, the main task this time is to survive for 4 days. The other tasks are not necessary, and there is no need to be so anxious. It doesn't matter if you really can't finish it. You're just taking advantage of the situation. Sui Jing's hand holding the phone paused. She squinted her eyes and slightly raised her chin to look at the lightless end of the corridor. The look in his eyes was pale, and his emotions were unclear. After a while, he still picked up his steps and continued walking forward. Pretend to be a ghost. Sui Jing sneered in her heart, not worried that she would meet something she shouldn't. Her fingertips lightly brushed the hilt of Zhang Huashu, since Ji Yun said that her knife, Zhang Huashu, was specially made by her and was essentially created to restrain the creatures in the copy. Then Sui Jing she felt that as long as there was no creature with too great a disparity in power, she could still deal with it easily and still have some strength left. She rested her right hand on the handle of the knife and still walked forward unhurriedly. In the blur, she seemed to see a black shadow flashing into a room near the end of the corridor. Sui Jing walked while checking the keys hanging on each door. As she walked, she suddenly stopped. The position she was in at the moment was only about 2 rooms away from the end of this corridor. After a few steps, she would have to turn to the right. However, after she left the first room, she actually saw another room on her left that was also unlocked. Not only was this room unlocked, but the door was not even closed. It was slightly ajar, and some of the conditions inside could be roughly seen through the narrow crack in the door. Sui Jing looked through the crack in the door and saw that the house was filled with all kinds of debris, including metal and wood products. Sui Jing paused outside the door for a moment, frowning in confusion. She clearly saw a dark figure running into the room just now, but now she was standing at the door and didn't hear any movement from inside. She took a deep breath and opened the door. Unexpectedly, she didn't see any living person in the room. This was obviously just an abandoned utility room, but most of the room was filled with various rusty and cracked iron knives and moldy or broken wooden chopping boards. There are also some rough nylon ropes of different lengths and other waste items scattered on the ground, with no apparent use for the time being. According to Qi Xiaomi's description last night, it is easy to deduce what these props and chopping boards were used for. However, just looking at the number, it is still very huge. This room was not covered with heavy dust like the one she entered. Maybe it was because someone came here often or someone specially cleaned it. But Sui Jing still prefers that someone enters this room every once in a while, because if someone had really cleaned it, they wouldn't have seen some easily identifiable black and red stains on the floor. After reading it, Sui Jing was about to leave the room when he heard the door of the room being closed with a bang. Her delicate brows froze, and she suddenly realized something was wrong. Perhaps the shadow that led him into this room was really a trap, and it was a particularly obvious trap. But the terrible thing is, she really came in. Bang made a very short muffled sound, and a certain chopping board stacked high was knocked to the floor by Sui Jing. Sui Jing quickly dodged the attack of the person in front of him, and when he suddenly realized something, the hand that was about to draw the knife stopped and kicked it sideways. The man blocked Sui Jing's outstretched leg and stepped forward before she continued to attack, forcing Sui Jing to take 2 steps back. Sui Jing sighed helplessly. He felt quite helpless now. But it didn't mean that there was a big gap in strength. Of course, as far as she is concerned, there may indeed be a big gap in strength. But it is not that she will be forced into the current dilemma of either attacking or not attacking. Whoa! The man raised his hand, and was about to swing it down at Sui Jing. But Sui Jing quickly grabbed his wrist, and stopped the movement. He doesn't seem to be very conscious now, although the intensity of the attack is very fierce. The direction of the attack is particularly easy to judge. Song Huaisheng. Sui Jing shouted in a low voice, with a restless emotion suppressed in his brows. She didn't expect this sound to bring him back to consciousness. What she insisted on saying was more like Sui Jing's self-venting of dissatisfaction. The person standing in front of her at this moment was none other than the god-level NPC underground wizard she had met before. Also the beautiful shark. But he was originally supposed to be Song Huaisheng, the first Chief Section Chief and System Chief Inspector of the Institute. His current appearance has not changed much compared to before except for slight changes in the color of his hair and pupils. And his facial features have not changed much. And now he looks more like a real person. More like the familiar Song Huaisheng in his memory. Especially since he is now wearing a coat similar to a white research coat. Although it looks more like a white lab coat. Just judging from the state of his pupils, his mind seemed not very clear. More like he was controlled by something. Just when Sui Jing was stunned, Song Huaisheng broke free from Sui Jing's restraints. This time, he did not continue to attack Sui Jing like before, but rushed straight towards Sui Jing. Sui Jing was thrown into his arms unpreparedly, and his whole body fell to the ground due to his unstable center of gravity. Fortunately, there happened to be an old cushion on the ground behind her. Otherwise, Sui Jing felt that her tailbone might be broken if she fell down. She could still find the energy to think about it. Song Huaisheng really didn't know the importance of what he did. While holding Sui Jing's shoulders, Song Huaisheng immediately held down her right wrist. And because Sui Jing subconsciously wanted to sit up at the moment she fell, her slender legs were now slightly bent. Song Huaisheng was he leaned over her and stuck one leg into the gap between her legs. Therefore, regardless of Song Huaisheng's extremely unstable mental state at the moment, their postures can be said to be too ambiguous. Sui Jing, who was at the center of the ambiguous atmosphere, did not want to hurt Song Huaisheng in this situation. And Song Huaisheng had no particularly strong intention to attack her at the moment. So she did not break away immediately. Besides, Sui Jing wanted to see what was going on with Song Huaisheng at this moment. Chapter 259 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing originally thought that Song Huaisheng would probably have his own specific thinking pattern like the copy when they met before. Although he didn't know her, he still had thoughts. But the current situation seems to be that she is overthinking it after all. It can be judged by the fact that Song Huaisheng just stared blankly at his face for a long time with a pair of shining but lifeless eyes. And there was no other reaction, either extreme or calm, for a long time. Song Huaisheng? Sui Jing hesitated for a moment, then called softly again, and patted his face gently with his free hand. Still no response. Seeing this, Sui Jing sighed helplessly in her heart. Since one hand was restrained and the position was too awkward for her, she moved slightly uncomfortably. However, Song Huaisheng, who had been staring at her blankly just a second ago, bit hard at the thin collarbone under Sui Jing's collar that had been loosened by the action just now. As if he had been suddenly stimulated. His Sui Jing frowned and took a breath of air. She could clearly feel Song Huaisheng's teeth sinking into the skin of her collarbone. And she might even bleed. With such a heavy tongue. Could this person be a dog? Song Huaisheng. There was a vague expression of anger between Sui Jing's brows. Just as she was about to push Song Huaisheng away, who was still pressing on her, she suddenly felt Song Huaisheng relax. Not only in this way. He seemed to have stuck out a little tip of his tongue, and was constantly licking the wound caused by his bite. And the place he was licking showed signs of moving to other places. Sui Jing's mind suddenly went blank. She even felt that her scalp was numb at this moment. The slender fingers of the hand she was holding tightened unconsciously. Her knuckles turned white, and her fingertips were almost embedded in her. In the palm of your hand. Bang! Sui Jing bit his back molars, and couldn't bear it anymore. He pushed Song Huaisheng aside hard. However, Song Huaisheng's attention was all focused on Sui Jing at the moment. Such an unexpected push unexpectedly. He sat down on the floor. Well? Song Huaisheng took a breath, frowned slightly, and lowered his head quietly. Although he didn't speak, his whole person looked aggrieved. Sui Jing exhaled, and then slowly adjusted his messed-up collar, making sure that others could not see the wound, and then slowly stood up on the cushion. Although the wound was completely invisible for a short time after she was injured, she still covered it up subconsciously. Chief Song. Are you awake now? Huh? Sui Jing squatted in front of Song Huisheng with one leg bent, and asked with a half smile. Her fists were half clenched, as if Song Huisheng would punch her as long as she said something she didn't like to hear. Song Huisheng, who was still extremely fierce and violent just now, slowly raised his head. His eyes were not as confused as before, but seemed to have returned to their normal appearance. He smiled weakly at Sui Jing, who was squatting in front of him, and said in a clear voice, I'm sorry, Miss Supervision. All I heard was Sui Jing sneered, humph. Well, Song Huisheng's words were drowned in Sui Jing's palm before he could say it. Sui Jing quickly covered his mouth and punched him with all his strength. Song Huisheng's beautiful and deep eyes widened, and he stopped Sui Jing's fist at the critical moment. The fist was only a millimeter away from his body. If Sui Jing were to hit it like this, his 5 senses were completely disabled, and even his ruined body, which had completely lost all sense of pain, might suffer from phantom pain for a while. Fortunately, although Sui Jing was holding back his anger in his heart, he didn't intend to hit him hard. He secretly slowed down the moment he was about to hit him, so it was expected that his fist would be stopped by Song Huisheng at this moment. Let go. Sui Jing stared at his held wrist and said coldly. Song Huisheng had no intention of letting go at this time, even though he knew in his heart that Sui Jing actually didn't want to fight with him. So he coaxed shamelessly, Jing, don't be angry. Although he really didn't know what he had done wrong. Jing was already angry. So what happened to him coaxing her? You have to be thick-skinned to find a partner. I'm not angry. Sui Jing paused and withdrew his hand. Why are you here? How can you remember me this time? After asking, she glanced at him suspiciously. You're not going to be an NPC in this dungeon again, are you? Song Huisheng carefully looked at Sui Jing's face, even though the expression on her face remained calm and unchanged. Song Huisheng knew that she must still be a little angry, but he didn't dare to say it directly, lest it would backfire and add fuel to the fire, which would do him no good. Well, you don't know. My situation is not stable. It's good and bad. It's very rare that I can remember everything that happened before, but most of the time it should be. He considered it for a moment, wording, and then continued, being in a state of being manipulated without realizing it. Just like the previous 2 meetings with Sui Jing. They were all when his consciousness was being controlled. Oh! Sui Jing responded softly, raising the corner of his mouth with a hint of unknown meaning. No wonder you still wanted my life when we first met. Song Huisheng had a bad premonition in his heart. This posture might be to settle accounts with the queen. He quickly explained to show his unwavering stance. I was absolutely completely controlled at that time. Even if I only had a little bit of self-awareness, I wouldn't hurt you at all. But there was nothing he could do at that time. He really couldn't control his will at all. So much so that when he woke up occasionally later and recalled the thrilling experience at that time, he wished he could split another self to stop him at that time. He simply couldn't imagine how regretful he would have been if he had really hurt Sui Jing. Then when your memory is normal, can you remember what you have done? Sui Jing had completely calmed down at this moment, with a calm demeanor. Actually, I don't remember most of it. At least I didn't remember it before, Song Huisheng said. His eyes never left Sui Jing. He didn't tell Sui Jing that although he couldn't remember most of what happened, he never forgot every time he met her afterwards, and would even replay the scenes in his mind. So when he saw her injured appearance in his memories, his heart felt as uncomfortable as if someone had tightly grasped it with his hands, suffocating him and making it difficult to breathe. Oh, so that's it. Sui Jing was not surprised, judging from the precision of the system settings. If he could casually remind him of the previous events, they would worry about whether there was a conspiracy. Song Huisheng's eyes were fixed on Sui Jing's face, and he carefully traced the outline of the person in front of him inch by inch with extremely soft eyes. This was the lover he thought about day and night, recalling over and over again in the lonely night. Until now, he couldn't remember how long it had been since they had stayed together and chatted like this. He is deeply aware that the time in the game is completely unequal to the time in the real world. There is no need to distinguish whether the days and nights in the game are real or illusory, because the system has its own set of time laws, which are independent of real time. So, he really misses his lover. He missed it every second of his conscious life. Chapter 260 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing lowered his eyelids and reached out to pull Song Huisheng up. Get up. Stop sitting on the floor. She subconsciously felt that it would still be uncomfortable for a big living person to sit on the floor. It's okay. Anyway, he won't be frozen now. Having said that, Song Huaisheng still stood up straight with the help of Sui Jing's strength. So, Sui Jing looked at his tightly held hands and frowned. How did you regain consciousness just now? Song Huaisheng slowly let go of his hand and coughed twice in embarrassment. Well, the moment I bit you, you suddenly regained consciousness. He stretched out his hand. He stroked the tip of his nose, his eyes a little wandering, as if he didn't dare to look directly into Sui Jing's eyes. Huh? Sui Jing stared at him seriously for a while, then sneered suddenly. I've woken up a long time ago. The tone was calm, and the emotion in the words could not be distinguished. Song Huaisheng raised his eyes and glanced at Sui Jing guiltily. Although he knew that Sui Jing was probably lifeless, he still felt inexplicably frightened. Moreover, after all, it was him who couldn't hold it back. Okay. Sui Jing changed the subject expressionlessly. We haven't gotten down to business yet. Does your appearance here mean there are any important clues in this place? Song Huaisheng's expression was a little tangled. He didn't want to lie to Sui Jing, but his memories in the two different states were not completely interoperable. When he was self-aware, he could only roughly know what he had done before, but he did not know what tasks he would be assigned later. You don't know? Do you? Sui Jing saw the confusion between his brows and eyes, and said loudly, forget it. I don't really intend to know anything from you. She said this sincerely, without any subjective personal thoughts. However, the speaker has no intention, but the listener has intention. To Song Huaisheng, who was standing aside, this sounded like a completely different story. Aging? Don't you dislike me? Song Huaisheng's beautiful face suddenly showed a pitiful look, and most people would not be able to help but give in to him when they saw it. 3 points. Even Sui Jing, who was standing in front of him now, was stunned for a moment. Fortunately, Sui Jing was also determined. She coughed lowly and trembled her eyelashes before saying softly, I don't have one. Song Huaisheng secretly raised the corners of his lips and said, I knew a Jing would not dislike me, but I really don't know why I appeared here. According to the program, I should be in another copy. Maybe I was put in the wrong place? It seems that without me, the system has not fixed any minor bugs. Sui Jing suddenly thought of something and looked at Song Huaisheng. Is it okay for you to talk to me openly like this? There are system informants everywhere in the game, and monitoring and surveillance are omnipotent. To be honest, she was a little worried. After all, she and Song Huaisheng were both supervisors who had been punished by the system. The system probably didn't know that she had remembered something from the past. What's more, now Song Huaisheng appeared here so blatantly talking to her. Let's not talk about herself. She is just a player now, and is not yet under the management of the system. The system can certainly manage her, but she has much more freedom than when she was an inspector. But Song Huaisheng is different. He has been incorporated as a part of the system. Now his relationship with the system is even closer than when he was the supervisor. If the system plans to settle accounts later, what will happen to Song Huaisheng? Such punishment is simply unimaginable. With a tacit understanding between the two of them, the moment Sui Jing was silent, Song Huaisheng already had a rough idea of the thoughts that were running through his mind. Song Huaisheng smiled restrainedly and gently, and comforted in a low voice, It's okay. I've also said that my subjective consciousness comes in waves, and the system has known this for a long time. It has tried various methods before, but some side effects are inevitable. So, although my current state is good and bad, sometimes under control and sometimes out of control, it is the best for the system. Excellent choice. You didn't lie to me? Sui Jing asked suspiciously. It's not that she doesn't want to trust Song Huaisheng. It's just that the system is really willing to have a person who is not under its control appear in its management system. However, Song Huaisheng's expression was too sincere to be fake, and she did not have any other opinions in a short period of time. So she had no choice but to believe his words. Really? Song Huaisheng nodded seriously and said, Don't worry too much. Song Huaisheng said half-truthfully. He knew that Sui Jing's memory was damaged at this time, and he probably couldn't tell how much of his words were true and how false. As long as his expression and tone were right, she wouldn't be suspicious. However, he seems to be fine now. It's hard to tell what kind of punishment he will face afterwards. But going back and forth is nothing more than those tricks. It's not like I haven't tried it before. I should have gotten used to it by now. Right. But those pains didn't matter. He could bear the pain he suffered secretly without letting Sui Jing know about it. As long as Jing could save himself this time, the rest would not be so important for the time being. And there is only one thing they have to do from beginning to end. As long as you can do that, no matter how much sacrifice you make, it's worth it. Only, he could no longer bear his Jing to suffer like that again. Even if she thinks about it, she will still make the same mistakes without hesitation. But at least now, she cannot suffer those pains. Even if she didn't care, Song Huaixing would still let her bear less. Then do you want to go with me to check out these apartments now? Sui Jing didn't realize that Song Huaixing was hiding something from him. But since he didn't want to tell her, she just didn't ask. Of course, Song Huaixing agreed immediately. Anyway, the final result will be the same after being known by the system. So it is better to spend more time with Sui Jing. Every time he glanced at it, he felt that his heart felt a little warmer. Yes. Seeing that he agreed, Sui Jing nodded and walked outside. After she turned the corner at the end of the corridor, she still saw many locked doors neatly arranged on both sides of the corridor. Sui Jing thought for a while and felt that since he was already here, he might as well open one of the doors and take a look. So I randomly selected a closed door and prepared to force it open. Hey, don't open it. Song Huaixing stepped forward and held Sui Jing's wrist to open the door, stopping Sui Jing from opening the door in time. He looked at her and shook his head gently, receiving Sui Jing's puzzled look. He didn't explain too much. Just smiled gently. There is nothing good in it, and it will most likely be difficult to deal with. If you can't help it, don't touch it. Although Song Huaixing did not know what was hidden in these closed rooms for the time being, his subconscious told him that it would not be simple. And he always believed that as long as the high-risk creatures in a copy did not take the initiative to provoke them. Song Huaixing always believed that players should not take the initiative to test these extremely dangerous things. Chapter 261 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Can I really not go in? Sui Jingshu asked casually as he held the door handle, his eyes as thin as frost falling on the tightly closed door. But at this moment, if anyone could look at the strong and straightforward look in her eyes, they would understand that she really wanted to go in and take a look. No. Song Huaixing's tone was gentle, but his face was very solemn, which clearly showed that he was not joking. The eyes he looked at Sui Jing were full of worry. Jing, don't risk your life. Okay. After getting along for so long, Song Huaixing naturally understood Sui Jing's true temperament. To a certain extent, there is something crazy about both of them. But this does not mean that Song Huaixing can acquiesce in Sui Jing's life-threatening behavior. Since Song Huaixing said so, Sui Jing was obviously reluctant to brush off his kindness. However, she also seriously considered it. It was too dangerous for her and Song Huaixing to keep him following her. At this moment, they should be an intersecting line that has not yet reached the intersection point. It is not the time for them to meet yet. Okay, then I won't go. Sui Jing moved his eyebrows slightly and said, as if he had compromised. Yes. Song Huaixing smiled slightly, with a gentle expression, feeling at ease with the choice Sui Jing made. However, in an instant, something unexpected happened. Sui Jing didn't know when he pried open the door lock behind his back. There was such a short distance between the two of them, but she was almost right under his nose. Sui Jing quickly opened the door, then pulled Song Huaixing to the door in one breath, and pushed Song Huaixing in with a slight force of his hand. Jing! Song Huaixing's eyes widened slightly, as if he wanted to grab the door frame to steady his steps. However, Sui Jing's series of actions were too sudden, and he never thought that Sui Jing would do this. Sui Jing's eyes flickered, and when he met Song Huaixing's surprised eyes, he just sighed silently. Huaixing, don't be sad. All I did was just following what was in my heart at that moment. I have my plans, and you are not part of my plans yet. You showed up at an inopportune time. After Song Huaixing was pushed in, Sui Jing closed the door without hesitation. The dark environment in the room could still be seen through the gap in the door that was closed instantly. It was as if all the light in the room had been absorbed, leaving only a thick and terrifying blackness. Sui Jing pursed his lips subconsciously, and his eyebrows curved into an anxious arc. She knew that Song Huaixing would not deceive her, and the situation in these rooms must be extremely dangerous. But precisely because of this, she pushed Song Huaixing inside. If nothing else, just because Song Huaixing is not only an NPC in the system, but also a top NPC, he cannot hang out with him. Push him in, and he might be able to leave the current copy smoothly and go to the copy he was set before. For him, it was much less risky. Even if Song Huisheng didn't mention anything, Sui Jing could roughly guess that if the copy of Song Huisheng really stuck with her everywhere, it was still unknown what kind of severe punishment he would face from the system after the copy ended. But what she knows is that Song Huisheng will definitely not feel better after the game is over. She couldn't let him suffer obvious pain. In that case, she might as well help him. Thinking about it, he might understand his good intentions. Furthermore, given his current status, the creatures in this sect would not dare to do anything to him. No matter what, he would only suffer some physical pain temporarily. But as she had been a part of the system, she knew that this was many times easier than the punishment imposed by the system itself. After Sui Jing closed the door, he even paused for a moment at the door to make sure that Song Huisheng would not chase him out. Then he continued to walk forward. She probably knew that although this building looked full of dangers, the clues and other things she wanted might not be found for the time being. It's better to go and have a look in other buildings. Maybe there will be unexpected gains. Sui Jing thought this, and actually did it. With light steps, she easily found the air corridor connecting two independent apartments. Pushing open the special frosted glass door and laid on the wall in front of you, you can clearly see the stone corridor about 6 feet long. Sui Jing knew that she was currently on a higher floor, but she really didn't expect that the corridor happened to be on this floor. As if someone had expected that she would come in from this floor. It felt very bad to be seen through. But Sui Jing just thought about it in his heart without any excessive emotions or actions. Even if it was what she thought, Sui Jing didn't intend to just go back. She stared at the other end of the corridor. Just like here, it also had an opaque frosted glass door. It looked like a dark hole, and there was no way to find out what was going on in the building opposite. This corridor is very gentle and narrow, with almost no slope, and is about enough width for 2 adults to walk side by side. And from the perspective of the building itself, it can be said that the construction is actually very simple, because it only spans between 2 independent buildings. But there is no support under the corridor. It looks like it only relies on 2 buildings. The building just connects it. Logically speaking, this is very unreasonable. But in the game world, all this does not need explanation at all. When people stand on the corridor and look up, they can see the gray sky without any obstruction. At this moment, it is so depressing that it is heart-stopping. Looking down, the ground is overgrown with weeds. Although there is nothing happening at present, the danger hidden in the dark is still unknown. Sui Jing clenched his fingers into fists, and then released them. He exhaled softly, and stepped steadily onto the air corridor, connecting the 2 buildings. Click. The corridor made a sudden crisp sound. The corridor looked like it was made of masonry and cement. But it unexpectedly made a sound similar to the friction of steel. It was really interesting. Sui Jing's eyelids twitched, and there was no obvious expression on his face. But his beautiful eyes were filled with not thick, but obvious disgust and speechlessness. To be honest, Sui Jing had even thought about whether this air corridor was some kind of mechanism. As long as she stepped on it, the corridor would collapse immediately, and she would have to fall from it, shattering her body into pieces and leaving her unrecognizable. But if it were really set up like this, it would be too perverted. However, Sui Jing only realized it when he saw the scene in front of him. The system was far more perverted and shameless than she imagined. Of course, this air corridor did not collapse as Sui Jing expected, but many densely packed arms that resembled dead would stretch out of thin air under the corridor and from the glass doors at the front and back. These arms were extremely long and looked like it doesn't even look like a human limb. I don't know where it was spliced from. The skin on the arms and backs of the hands was wrinkled together, like bark that had dried up for a long time. However, the skin color of these arms is very pale, whiter than bleaching. But what Sui Jing was very confused about was that these arms that grew out of nowhere were clearly part of a supernatural plot. So how could they make unnecessary noises, like a clicking sound? But before Sui Jing could think about the weird arms around her, she was already ready to move. Although she won't think about it too much. No matter how unreasonable it is, it will gradually become reasonable in the copy. But now all these arms were reaching towards Sui Jing with their teeth and claws open. The roads in front and behind were completely blocked by a large number of withered hands. Only some positions on the side had fewer arms. Only a few sparsely. Judging from the current situation, it seems that other than jumping directly from the side of the corridor where there are fewer arms, no other method seems to be feasible. TSK. Sui Jing clicked his tongue impatiently, with a hint of gloomy emotion in his eyes. Putting aside everything else, if someone could really jump off the side of this corridor, he would really be considered a capable person. After all, The distance between this air corridor and the ground is really not that low. Even though Sui Jing now knows that her overall physical fitness and abilities have improved significantly compared to before, she does not dare to easily try such a dangerous behavior. It is true that she has no concept of death and is not afraid of it. Sometimes she is even willing to seek death. But this does not mean that she will seek death so brainlessly. What's more, if she jumped from here and did not die, but became a semi-invalid person, it seems that the end would be even more miserable. Thinking of this, Sui Jing took a breath and looked around at the deformed arms and trembled his eyelashes weakly. There is nothing I can do. If I don't go up, will it look too useless? Chapter 262 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Sui Jing smoothly pulled out the sharp blade hanging from his waist. At the same time, those arms seemed to feel the changes in the movements and emotional attitude of Sui Jing's hands. They knew that Sui Jing might pose some kind of threat to them, but he did not do so at all. After retreating, he actually bared his teeth and claws to attack Sui Jing. However, the next second, when those terrifying stumps were about to touch Sui Jing's body, she unexpectedly put Zhang Wangshu back into the scabbard with a swish sound. The big brother with a broken arm, who was dancing wildly with demons. Dancing and excited? What are you doing? What do you mean you stopped suddenly? Sui Jing stood tall and straight, staring indifferently at the group of strange broken arms, who seemed to be stunned for a moment with half-open eyes. And a chuckle suddenly escaped from the gap between the tightly fitting lips. It's hard to tell whether the curved smile is more teasing or sarcastic. However, Sui Jing could see that these arms seemed to have thoughts of their own. Perhaps the ability to think independently. Sui Jing did not hesitate, turned around, and simply tied one end of the golden silk thread tied around his wrist to the corridor handrail. He did not tie it with too many knots, but only made sure that it would not slip off halfway. And then, without any hesitation, he stepped on the handrail and jumped down. The gold thread on his wrist began to expand and become wider. At the same time, the silk thread tied to the end of Sui Jing's wrist became extremely soft. It felt like the most comfortable wristband, and the thread would not be easily loosened. He strangled Sui Jing's hand. Sui Jing originally only knew that the bundle of gold threads he had obtained in the previous copy was indeed a rare and useful prop. And he was also well aware of the rarity of this prop. And what Sui Jing is most satisfied with is that it is not like the props that you get from the prop card at the end of the game that can only be used once and then become invalid. It can be recycled many times until it is damaged. Although Sui Jing didn't know to what extent this kind of prop would be considered damaged. But, before they are damaged, please let these props play their role as much as possible, because she is really someone who can take full advantage of something. So she will slowly squeeze out all its abilities little by little, and use them for her own use. However, Sui Jing's current whereabouts were slightly different from what she expected. She expected that she would pass this level after she landed safely on the ground along the golden thread. But she didn't expect that it was not as expected. The moment her feet left the corridor, the middle section of the corridor instantly broke apart, and even began to collapse toward both ends. Seeing that the heavy pile of rocks was about to fall towards her, the moment Sui Jingshuang's feet touched the ground, she immediately lightly touched the gold thread. The section of gold thread tied to the armrest immediately untied itself like a clever little snake and became thin again, back on Sui Jing's wrist. Without any time to think, Sui Jing quickly dodged to the side to prevent those rocks from falling on him and causing unnecessary trauma. Although the stone corridor collapsed to the ground, the arms that inexplicably stretched out from the corridor did not disappear. They extended from the scattered broken stones to the ground, and actually continued to attack from all directions towards where Sui Jing was standing. How should I put it? This scene is really weird and ridiculous. On the weedy ground, several stumps and broken arms gradually grew, and in the center, surrounded by the stumps and broken arms, stood a living person calmly. A gust of cold wind blew by, lifting the soft silver hair on Sui Jing's cheek. Suddenly I felt a little pain in my eyes. I was really stimulated by the weird scene in front of me. However, after being thrown out of the air, the group of arms seemed to be confused about their direction, or for some other reason. They kept circling around Sui Jing, but they never meant to attack her. Although it is unclear what the specific cause of this situation is, it is a good thing for Sui Jing after all. So she ignored those arms, turned around and ran towards the apartment opposite. Although the ground was overgrown with weeds, it still could not hinder Sui Jing's agile steps. She was very close to the apartment, just a stone's throw away. So he didn't look back to see what those arms were doing, but ran faster towards the door of another building. After arriving at the door of the first floor of the apartment, Sui Jing could only see these two apartments from where he was standing. She found that the apartment here was different from the one she came out of just now. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the appearance is different. The building just now looked like a normal apartment, but the one in front of me turned out to be in the shape of a cylindrical tower. But it was much larger than the towers in those movies and TV dramas. Judging from the exterior painting, it looked like a normal apartment. Much brighter. Not only this one. Except for the apartment building she came to just now. The other apartment buildings vaguely buried in the fog seemed to be tall towers. Furthermore, the door to the apartment just now was locked from the inside, and there was no way to open it from the outside. So she decided to climb in through the window. As for this building, it is locked from the outside with a chain. But according to Sui Jing's brain circuit, he would definitely still forcefully open this door. Sui Jing skillfully pulled out Zhang Wan's shoe from the black scabbard, stood the shiny blade on the iron chain, and pulled it down smoothly. The iron chain as thick as his thumb broke instantly and fell silently on a muddy ground covered with weeds. She knew that Zhang Wan's shoe had always been able to cut iron like clay, so it was easy to cut off this chain. There was a heavy bang sound, and Sui Jing's figure quickly flashed into the door, slamming the door shut, cutting off the bright light outside, and also cutting off the wildly dancing arms outside the door. Sui Jing turned around, leaning his back against the door, and found that it was really dark in this apartment. In such a large apartment building, she didn't see a single window. At least, she didn't see it on the first floor now. She recalled the layout she saw from the outside, and found that there were indeed no windows on the first floor. She came here alone, and did not take her luggage with her. The flashlight was placed in the suitcase, since there was no internet connection on her phone during the game. She just charged it from time to time. The remaining battery on my phone had been exhausted in the apartment just now, so currently only her watch can emit a little faint light. But it is obviously not enough for lighting. But she really didn't have any other lighting tools on her. Even so, with the thought of better than nothing, Sui Jing still slightly increased the brightness of the watch. In this extremely dark situation, even a faint light is better than no light at all. She used the little bits of fluorescence emitted by her watch to pace slowly on the first floor of the apartment. From the outside, you can see that the overall layout of the apartment is cylindrical, and the structure of the lobby on the first floor is also cylindrical. And there didn't seem to be many rooms on the first floor. She turned around and found only two doors. One is the door she just came in, and the other is in the corner, which should be a back door. The entire back door was wrapped with chains, making it impossible to open it easily. Thinking about it, maybe people who entered this building before were unable to get out on their own. Sui Jing didn't hesitate. Intuitively, the real weirdness of this apartment would most likely not be on the first floor. After all, apart from being a little dark, this floor is really too empty. It's so empty that you can see the entire layout at a glance when there are lights. Sui Jing lowered her delicate eyebrows and sighed silently, then walked towards the spiral staircase not far from him. Maybe you will find something useful when you get to the second floor? After Sui Jing reached the second floor, she walked straight to the iron door closest to her. She reached out and tapped the door rhythmically with her knuckles a few times, then leaned her ear slightly against the door to listen for any unusual movement inside. After listening for a long time, I didn't hear any sound coming from inside. I don't know if the sound insulation of this door is so good that it almost completely isolates the sound propagation in the room. It doesn't mean there must be something dangerous inside. I hope that's not the case. Otherwise Sui Jing really doesn't know how to deal with it. But there are some things that you don't know what to do until they happen. Sui Jing stood up straight again and turned the doorknob with his hand. As expected, the iron door did not respond at all, and was locked again. That wouldn't be surprising, and perhaps even scarier if it actually opened its doors to welcome her. She stared at the seemingly ordinary iron door in front of her, pursed her lips slightly, and then took out the hairpin she had prepared long ago and inserted it into the keyhole. Now that there was no Song Huaisheng to stop her, she still wanted to take the gamble this time. Maybe she is really lucky this time? Although it was a bit memorized as always before. Click. TSK. Sui Jing opened the door and looked at the scene inside the door, smacking his lips slightly. His eyebrows slightly darkened. She knew that she was not so unlucky this time, and that she really guessed it right. After unlocking the door, she didn't go in immediately. Instead, she raised her wrist and glanced at the time on her watch. There are no other special regulations in the orphanage, but one is that visiting volunteers cannot miss the mealtime. Once it is time to eat, Everyone must appear at the table on time. Although I don't know what the intention is. It is obviously safer not to violate this. Sui Jing looked at the 940 displayed on the dial, and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she hadn't been away for too long. And there was still time for her to explore the situation here a little. It would not be good if someone else or someone from the orphanage discovered him at this time. Is there any clue she wants here? Probably. Chapter 263 Sunshine Welfare Institute. As the door was slowly opened, Sui Jing subconsciously touched the itchy tip of her nose with her fingers, even though she had covered her mouth and nose in advance. The smell of decay, mold, dampness, and heavy dust was still there. It instantly overflowed her nasal cavity. Due to the lack of bright light, she could not see what was going on inside the room. So Sui Jing stayed at the door for a while, waiting until some clean air from outside finally came in, before she walked towards the room. Sui Jing walked into the house, and closed the door with his backhand. Unexpectedly, the moment the door was closed, the oil lamps placed in the corners of the house suddenly lit up on their own. The dim light could barely illuminate the environment inside the house. And Sui Jing could clearly see what was in the house that could emit such a rotten smell. Even though Sui Jing smelled a strange smell before entering, he never expected that the scene inside would be so unspeakable. This room is not very spacious. Probably about the same size as the room Sui Jing and the others live in now. Judging from the furnishings in the house, it is inferred that this may have been a place for volunteers and children to live in the past. There are also 2 bunk beds placed on the left and right in the house. It's just that no one may have been here for a long time. And there is a thick layer of dust accumulated on the floor and furniture of the room. There was nothing surprising about Sui Jing. What really surprised Sui Jing was that although there was dust accumulation in other parts of the room, there was no spider silk or anything like that. But the sides of each bed were covered with dense, sticky spider webs. Since it is a 2-tiered bed, the spider web can surround the bed airtightly, forming a unique barrier that looks like a bed curtain and can almost cut off most of the sight. Sui Jing walked slowly to the bed behind the door. With the dim light and the fine cobweb barrier, he could barely see the scene on the bed. I saw an object like a silkworm chrysalis lying upright on the bed. But the silkworm chrysalis did not wrap up all the things inside, exposing the head of the thing. So it can be clearly seen that this is actually a corpse that has been dead for a long time. And it can even be called a mummy. The rest of the body except the head was tightly wrapped in spider silk. And the remaining head was unrecognizable and haggard. Only a layer of yellow and dull skin was left covering the skull. Sui Jing frowned and looked at the other 3 beds again. This was not rigorous enough. She not only opened the 2 doors next door and went in to check it out. She even went to a room on the 3rd and 4th floors. Checked it out. I found that the silkworm chrysalises in each room had similar shapes and had long since become mummies. The tower has 7 floors, each with 11 rooms arranged in a ring. Open the door to the corridor and fence. Assuming that there are 4 corpses in each room, there are many corpses in this tower alone. Not to mention that there are so many similarly closed apartment buildings behind it. It's just that the corpses here are all adults in size. And there are both men and women. They must be players who died without successfully completing the level in the past. But that would be a little weird if that were the case. Only the players were seen. But no children were seen. But since she arrived, almost everyone has been telling her that there are other children in the orphanage. So where are those children hidden? Sui Jing lowered her eyes and looked at the time again. It had been more than an hour since the last time she looked at the watch. It seemed that she had to go back first. The 2 children might be a little anxious now that they can't find her. If you accidentally say something or someone sees something, you will lose more than you gain. After all, I only found some clues and didn't even have time to sort them out. Sui Jing turned around and went out and locked the door again. Although these apartments in principle said that no one was allowed to come in, except for the outermost floors of all apartments that were surrounded by fences. The actual distance between these individual apartment buildings was it is not blocked by fences or other barriers. The fog here is so thick that you can't see anything clearly from about 2 meters away. Therefore, although Sui Jing didn't know whether the severed arms were still on the ground, in order to avoid trouble, he left in the opposite direction after leaving the door. Sui Jing quickened his pace and stopped at the front entrance of the building where they now lived. Just as he was about to open the door and go in, he heard a small and noisy sound coming from inside. She paused as she was about to twist the door handle, but did not go in immediately, because she vaguely heard the crying voices of Qi Xiaogua and Qi Xiaomi inside the house. Xiaogua, tell me, Where is the sister who took care of you? Teacher Zhang stared at Qi Xiaoguo angrily, as if he wanted to know something from him. But a slightly smug and ferocious smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. We were playing hide-and-seek with my sister. This time Xiaomi and I hid. And then my sister came to us. I guess it must be because Xiaomi and I hid too secretly that my sister was not found. So we don't know where she went after that. Qi Xiaoguo felt extremely aggrieved. After finishing speaking, he curled up his lips and raised his eyebrows. Her round eyes were filled with tears. Sui Jing stood outside the door and raised her eyebrows slightly. She did not expect that the two children would lie for her. Hide and seek? Teacher Zhang repeated Qi Xiaoguo's words in disbelief, and then looked at Qi Xiaomi, who was holding Qi Xiaoguo's clothes and standing aside with her head tremblingly. Xiaomi, you are the most obedient. Tell the teacher. Is what Brother Xiaoguo said true? Qi Xiaomi raised her head and glanced at Teacher Zhang secretly, then quickly avoided Teacher Zhang's sight. She nodded gently, squeezed the rabbit doll in her arms tightly with both hands, and then spoke softly and softly. It's true. Brother Xiaoguo and I will never lie to you. Then have you told your sister not to go to other apartments? Teacher Zhang asked again. Yeah. We said it. And sister agreed to us. Qi Xiaomi nodded affirmatively. Sister will definitely not run around. At this point, Teacher Zhang saw that she really couldn't ask anything and didn't force anything. And she believed that these children wouldn't lie to her. Such a young child. Only 7 or 8 years old. How can he understand what lying is? Kid. Lying is not a good habit. Sui Jing guessed that there might be more than just them in the lobby. But he didn't expect that Su Ying would also join in the fun. Sui Jing stopped lingering at the door, opened the door and walked in with a calm look on his face, as if he didn't know what the group of them were talking about inside. Huh? Su Ying paused when he heard the dull sound of pushing the door open. He turned to look at Sui Jing in surprise, but he couldn't hide a subtle hint of guilt in his eyes. She opened her mouth and said very naturally, Beauty, why did you come in from the outside? It was really hard to see any flaw. You couldn't have accidentally walked into some forbidden place, right? As soon as these words came out, Teacher Zhang, who had just calmed down, immediately focused his attention on Sui Jing. She looked at Sui Jing sternly and asked in a deep tone, When did you go out? Su Ying's question was very interesting. It seemed that he was concerned about Sui Jing, but the hidden meaning behind his words was that Sui Jing must have gone to a place where he was not allowed to enter. If it hadn't been for the incident where she made such nonsense in front of Sui Jing might not have taken her words to heart. Just now, Sui Jingyun replied calmly, I just walked around the apartment and took a look. What? Can't we go out? Going around in a circle? Teacher Zhang frowned and asked in confusion, Why did you go out and go around in a circle? From Teacher Zhang's point of view, Sui Jing could tell that he was full and had nothing to do. Don't you know? Sui Jing suddenly made a worried and doubtful expression. His brows furrowed slightly, and there was still some panic in his eyes. What do you know? Tell me. Teacher Zhang became impatient. His eyebrows were furrowed, and the corners of his mouth showed dissatisfaction. Sui Jing raised his eyelids and glanced at Teacher Zhang tangledly, pursed his lips twice, and then took a few steps forward, closing the distance between him and Teacher Zhang. She glanced out of the corner of her eye at Su Ying, who was standing aside and staring blankly at them. She came close to Teacher Zhang's ear and covered her mouth with her hands. Then she whispered word by word in a voice that only the two of them could hear. I think our orphanage is haunted. Chapter 264 Sunshine Welfare Institute. What nonsense are you talking about? Even though Teacher Zhang guessed that Sui Jing would not answer her question seriously, she obviously did not expect that Sui Jing would talk nonsense. She pretended to wave away Sui Jing's hand with a look on her face. With a violent look on his face, he scolded with a cold eyebrow. She now really felt that the volunteer named Sui Jing in front of her was really sick. And he was seriously ill. Every day. It became so severe that I started to suffer from hysteria. I'm not talking nonsense. Sui Jing started to act anytime and anywhere again, and said with a sincere expression, Of course, I really saw it before I said that. Otherwise how could I run out alone? Sui Jing blinked and looked at Teacher Zhang pretending to be aggrieved, wishing that anxiety was written all over his face. You must have asked Xiaoguo and the others just now. We are playing the game well. So why should I make things difficult for myself? In a sense, despite being anxious, Sui Jing explained to Teacher Zhang logically and clearly, trying to make her believe in him. The three of us were planning to play hide-and-seek together after dinner. After the first few rounds of the game, it was my turn to come find them. As a result, While I was waiting for them to hide, I saw a figure wearing white clothes suddenly walking past the open door. I recalled carefully that none of the people in the orphanage and us volunteers were wearing pure clothing at all. I just want to chase the man in white to see who he is, Sui Jing said calmly, expecting that Qi Shaogu and the others would not expose him. But as soon as I walked to the door, the white figure disappeared immediately. But because I was so curious, I walked around the apartment to find if the figure was hiding. I didn't believe that our orphanage was haunted at first. But if it were a human being, would it really disappear from sight all of a sudden? Sui Jing's words were sincere and did not seem to be hypocritical. Moreover, what she said was basically consistent with what Qi Shaogu said. Now even Teacher Zhang couldn't tell how much of her words were true or false. And even if she really suspected that Sui Jing had violated the regulations, she had no definite evidence to prove it. For now, she could only believe that Sui Jing would let it go. However, their orphanage shouldn't be haunted. Right? Teacher Zhang thought unconfidently. After all, this has never happened before. Then have you found that figure? Teacher Zhang asked doubtfully. No. Sui Jing sighed and shook his head regretfully. He ran so fast that he disappeared all of a sudden. Even though I walked around the apartment, I didn't see him again. Teacher Zhang, do you think the white figure will appear again? Sui Jing looked at her worriedly. Will he do something? Our lives won't be in danger. Right? How is it possible? Hearing what Sui Jing said, Teacher Zhang actually felt relieved and said nonchalantly, since you haven't found it, it means that the figure doesn't actually exist at all. You must have been dazzled for a moment and saw it wrong. Our orphanage has never been haunted. But, Sui Jing gritted his teeth. Not to be outdone and planned to continue talking, I just clearly. Okay. Teacher Zhang interrupted Sui Jing forcefully. That's it for now. Don't say such pretentious words in front of the children. Or scare them later. After Teacher Zhang perfunctorily raised her formulaic mechanical smile. Don't worry. Miss Sui. Don't scare yourself. Don't worry. Our apartment will definitely protect the personal safety of you volunteers. But since you said so, I will definitely arrange for people to check around the orphanage later to see if there is really any suspicious person sneaking into the orphanage. But I always believe that our orphanage is absolutely safe. Before you find the person, I still think you must be too tired and not get enough rest to look away. After lunch later, Miss Sui, please take a good rest and take care of yourself. Okay then. Sui Jing frowned slightly and nodded gently. Still a little worried, but he didn't intend to hold back on this matter. Suddenly, her eyes fell on Suing, who had been standing silently for so long, and she asked blankly, Is Miss Su feeling unwell? Why does she look so ugly? No. Suing smiled reluctantly. Maybe it's because I haven't slept well. Miss Sui also knows that sleeping in a place like this is always difficult. Well, if Miss Su is sick, you must see her in time. Sui Jing did not dwell too much on this topic. He turned to Teacher Zhang and asked, Well, I heard that we might be able to see each other today. Are you going to the dean? Is that true? Sui Jing suddenly asked, catching Teacher Zhang off guard by the change of topic. This? Teacher Zhang didn't know what he was thinking and hesitated for a while before replying. You should come over today to have a look. We are never sure of the dean's whereabouts. But don't worry. It doesn't matter even if the dean is not here. We will definitely entertain you. As he said this, he reached out to pat Sui Jing. Shoulders. Hissed the moment his palm was about to touch Sui Jing's shoulder. Sui Jing's breath suddenly stagnated. He couldn't help but take a step back and then bowed slightly, covering his heart with a look of pain on his face. I'm sorry. I suddenly feel a little uncomfortable. Can you leave first? Sui Jing's face gradually turned pale, and his tone became weaker. It looked like he was really in unbearable pain. Teacher Zhang looked at his empty hand and narrowed his eyes in dissatisfaction. But when he saw cold sweat breaking out on Sui Jing's forehead, his lips instantly lost color, and his face looked painful. He no longer cared about it. Then you go and rest for a while. I have something to do too. But do you need to call a doctor to check on you? It looks quite serious. Teacher Zhang asked symbolically. After all, the physical problems of these volunteers have nothing to do with her. No. 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 Sui Jing waved his hand feebly, his long fingers spasming with pain. It should be fine if I go back to the room and rest for a while. If nothing happens, I'll leave first. Sui Jing turned around and waved weakly to the two little beans, gesturing for them to follow him back to the room. When passing by Suing, his hazy eyes flickered across her face, and he found that Su Ying was clenching her fists tightly, but her expression was very relaxed. Seeing this, Sui Jing left without stopping. Miss Su, are you feeling uncomfortable in any way? Maybe it was because Su Ying looked really bad. So Teacher Zhang also asked. After getting a negative answer, he didn't say anything. He just continued, in that case, you should go back first, and come down again during lunchtime. Teacher Zhang said to Su Ying. She didn't know if it was Sui Jing's misunderstanding, but she always felt that the tone of Teacher Zhang and Su Ying's words were a little different. Although it's not that obvious. You can still hear the politeness in his words, if you listen carefully. Sui Jing quickened his pace, and led the two children towards his room. Now it is more certain that Su Ying's identity is definitely not as simple as a player. Sister, are you okay? After Sui Jing closed the door, she found two children looking at her with worried faces. Only then did she remember that she seemed to be pretending to be sick. It seems that my acting skills are not bad. Just before she opened the door, she anticipated that she might not be able to get through it easily if she didn't use some means. So she took out the medicine bottle she carried with her, poured out a capsule and swallowed it. This capsule is actually a drug that can accelerate the secretion of adrenaline in a short period of time and has no other effects. The cold sweat cramp just now was caused by the rapid secretion of adrenaline. But combined with Sui Jing's acting skills, it was the best way to pretend to be sick. It's just that the effect of this capsule is a bit too strong, and the sudden surge of adrenaline is actually uncomfortable. She still feels a dull pain in her temples. Fortunately, the pain was nothing to her, but it wasn't too uncomfortable either. She closed her eyes to calm down her breathing and emotions, and said, "It's okay." Sui Jing reached out and rubbed the top of Xiaogu and Xiaomi's hair, comforting him. "You are okay, right? Teacher Zhang just had a fight. Do you scold you?" Sui Jing asked. The tone of Teacher Zhang I heard outside the door just now was not very good. The two little cubs might have been scolded before I came in. "No." Qi Xiaogu shook his head and said seriously, "Teacher Zhang doesn't dare to hit us." Sui Jing quickly realized that what Qi Xiaogu said was that the teacher did not dare to hit them. Not that he would not hit them. It means that there must be something in them that makes Teacher Zhang afraid. So he dare not do anything to children like them. Well, that's good. Sui Jing didn't ask him why. If he really wanted to say something, she didn't have to ask him personally. What you ask may not necessarily be credible. But, were you just lying on behalf of your sister? Sui Jing walked to the edge of the sofa and sat down, squinting slightly and looking at the two children stuck in front of her, and asked casually. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaogu were stunned for a moment, and then looked at each other. They didn't nod or shake their heads. They just blinked and stared at Sui Jing with their big eyes. Chapter 265 Sunshine Welfare Institute. Don't pretend to be stupid for me. Sui Jing stretched out his finger and tapped Qi Xiaogu's eyebrows, trying to pretend to be innocent. Tell me, why did you lie for me? Qi Xiaomi held the rabbit doll in his arms with one hand, took a step forward, gently grabbed Sui Jing's sleeve with his other free hand, shook it, and said in a sweet voice, "Sister, we were wrong. Don't be angry." Sui Jing looked at Qi Xiaomi confused, not understanding why she felt she was angry. Sister is not angry. After all, he is a child, and there are some truths that he cannot explain to them. So it is faster to just say nice things. Why would Xiaomi think that sister is angry? In order to prove that he was not angry, Sui Jing softened his tone when talking to Qi Xiaomi. Well, because my sister didn't smile at us after she came back. Qi Xiaomi thought for a while and said slowly. Sui Jing raised his eyebrows when he heard this. The reason Qi Xiaomi said didn't seem to be valid. Although she admitted that her face just now did not look good, she couldn't say she was angry. Right. Moreover, she doesn't seem to smile much. Right. Nothing. Sui Jing said helplessly. Sister is just a little worried that you will be bullied by others when I am not with you. But, Qi Xiaogu said aloud. Teacher Zhang said that she and the dean hate lying children the most. And if someone lies and the dean finds out, the dean will expel the person who lied from the orphanage. Is this what she told you? Sui Jing asked. Sui Jing was a little surprised, but understandable. The so-called dean manages such a large welfare home, so it is best if everyone obeys his instructions. And lying will be the biggest obstacle on the road to management. Yes. Qi Xiaomi and Qi Xiaogu nodded simultaneously. So, do you think I will hate you because you lied? Sui Jing touched the top of Qi Xiaogu's hair and asked calmly. Then let me ask you. Since you are not allowed to lie, Why did you lie to Teacher Zhang just now? My sister obviously never played games with you from the beginning? Because if we didn't lie to Teacher Zhang, my sister would be arrested by them. It would be very miserable. Shi Xiaomi probably didn't know what miserable means. So she just danced and exaggeratedly described it. We think our sister is very good to us. And we don't want her to be arrested. Qi Xiaohua also echoed, as long as we don't tell the truth to Teacher Zhang, nothing will happen to our sister. We will protect my sister. Sui Jing was really amused now. It turned out that in their opinion, telling them stories and accompanying them was considered good for them. Look, this is why my sister doesn't hate you. You lied to protect your sister. You are my sister's little heroes. How could your sister blame you and then hate you? Sui Jing comforted. It's not too late for my sister to like you. I have to say that although Sui Jing said she didn't know how to coax children, she really had her own way of coaxing children. The two children were so coaxed that they were elated and delighted. But her words are not nonsense. Having such a pair of helpers in the game is certainly a good thing for her. As long as you remember that you are not lying to do something bad. Sometimes it's okay to tell lies appropriately. So that's it. Shi Xiaohua nodded as if he understood. Then I understand. I understand too. Qi Xiaomi looked at Qi Xiaohua. Then turned to look at Sui Jing. Confused as if he knew something. So she naturally squeezed into Sui Jing's arms, and said coquettishly, Sister, am I strong? Yeah. Sui Jing couldn't help pinching Qi Xiaomi's bulging cheeks, and said in a coaxing tone, Xiaomi is super awesome. Hey, sister, is it true what you just told Teacher Zhang downstairs, that you saw a white figure outside? Qi Xiaohua remembered what Sui Jing had just said downstairs, and asked curiously. He wasn't afraid. Just curious. Maybe? Sui Jing was not so sure now. She shook her fingers carelessly, and raised a faint smile on her lips. Maybe it's just like what Teacher Zhang said. I made a mistake. Qi Xiaohua and Qi Xiaomi looked at Sui Jing's dark and unclear expression. And both saw a look of confusion on the other's face. As for whether Sui Jing saw the figure outside the apartment, only Sui Jing himself knew. In fact, Sui Jing was really not talking nonsense, but a bunch of words mixed with half-truth and falsehood, with some minor changes made based on the facts. Go back a few hours. Hide it. Don't make a sound. Sui Jing was originally ready to leave after placing Qi Xiaomi. But at this moment, Sui Jing saw a familiar figure passing quickly outside the apartment. She just slightly changed the situation she witnessed. In fact, she didn't see a figure passing through the open door, but through a frosted glass window on the left side of the door on the first floor. She saw a flash of bright red running outside. Clear shadow. Sui Jing had no doubt that he was dazzled, because the shadow paused slightly when it was about to run through the window, as if it was observing the situation in the hall through the glass. Seeing that no one was in the room, the figure speeded away again. The frosted glass naturally did not allow Sui Jing to clearly see the faces of the figures outside. But since he is wearing red clothes, it is much easier to guess. After all, there was only one person in the orphanage wearing such bright red clothes. Sui Jing was standing behind the square beams at the four corners of the hall, which was in the blind spot of his sight from the outside. Not to mention that the frosted glass itself could also blur some of his sight. Therefore, the red figure did not see anyone standing in the quiet lobby at that time. Sui Jing looked at the figure running in the direction that seemed to be the fence gate of the orphanage, as if he was leaving the orphanage. But yesterday, Qi Xiaohua and the others had told her not to step out of the area covered by the orphanage at will. Since Qi Xiaohua had told her, there was no reason why the other children should not explain this to the remaining volunteers. Sui Jing felt that they would still fulfill the obligations that these NPCs should fulfill. And even if they didn't say it, no player would really run into that unclear fog without scruples. So Sui Jing couldn't figure out for a while why that figure dared to leave the orphanage openly. If a person chooses to leave the orphanage despite knowing that going out will be risky, it means that at least she can 100% guarantee that her safety will not be threatened. But why? She must be hiding some huge unknown secret. As for why Sui Jing said he saw a white figure or saw it at the door, he was of course lying to them. Otherwise, if she were to find out all of a sudden, she would do something detrimental to Sui Jing. However, Sui Jing did not expect that her psychological quality was so poor. Just hearing Sui Jing say this scared her out of her mind. Sui Jing suddenly smiled lightly, looked at Qi Xiaohua and Qi Xiaomi, and said, Sister wants to do something. Are you willing to help me?